Okay, yo. Welcome to Made to Think with your host, Ninjam. Today is a very, very special day. I'm probably going to rocket into some new realm of podcast gaga. I've been listening to these two guys' podcast for just over 2 years, and they just caught my eye. I did find out I discovered them through another podcast, and they did a special on the Marvel universe. I wasn't a Marvel fan. It's one of the biggest story arcs to actually get into, and these guys made me rewatch the whole freaking thing, and I was like, yeah. I missed a lot of stuff, and thanks to these guys, they gave me a new, let's say, new third eye. And I'm pretty good at film. These guys are pretty good, pretty damn good at everything. So before further ado, and with great excitement, I want to introduce the two guys from Operation Red Pill, one of my favorites podcasts and two of the greatest content creators right now in the podcast universe. It's the one and only Jason Spears and Christopher Dean. Hello, gentlemen. How are you today?
Hey, good.
How you
good.
doing, Adam, man? It's so good to be here, man.
Welcome. First of all, congratulations on getting to 100 episodes. I'm sure by the time of this recording, you're over already. But what an achievement! Just for my audience, please introduce yourselves. Sorry, I'm just waking up in Vietnam. It's 5 a.m. If you'd like to say it, Jason, knock it out.
Good morning, Vietnam. Oh, I gotta love that.
That's awesome. All right, so Jason, please introduce yourself to the audience.
My name is Jason Spears. I'm a co-host of Operation Red Pill that I do with my best friend Christopher, and I am happy to be here. It's great to feel like we're getting interviewed. We don't get that much, so I can't wait to get into the nitty-gritty and the tall grass here. If you hear any responses that you love, it was all me. Christopher had nothing to do with that. He just came up with the simple answers.
And Christopher, please introduce yourself.
I'm Christopher Dean, co-host of Operation Red Pill. Apparently, I only have one job, as my co-host is constantly reminding me. But yeah, equally excited to be on here and get to meet you. So this is going to be awesome.
Fantastic. So first of all, how did you guys meet?
Jason told me I was going to hell.
That is
That's how we met.
Exactly what I said. In fact, I think that's an oversimplification. I might have said that you would be burning hell with gasoline draws, but you took it way too personal. Now, we met at work, actually. And I was having a conversation with another coworker. I'd had a few of them, and I noticed that Christopher would be nearby, and he would constantly be laughing at certain parts of jokes that I was telling. And one of the things I've noticed is that you can tell a lot about a person's intellect based on where they laugh in a joke. And Christopher was laughing at the parts I would laugh at. And I'm like, hey, get off my frequency. What are you doing laughing at these parts of the joke? I might have to talk to you later. We ended up having a conversation walking out of work. And I think we were talking about the different, wasn't it if all sin was equal?
Yeah, if all sin was equal.
Yeah, and I Christopher had this wonderful argument. I tore his argument apart, and then I told him, you know what, if you just had made this point, you could have had a much better argument and maybe won. And he was like, wait a minute. So you knew both sides of the argument and you were just playing with me? And I was like, I wouldn't say I was playing with you. I just want to see how smart you are. You're pretty smart. I was like, thanks for playing. We'll try this again tomorrow. And it kicked off this really cool friendship. And then we ended up getting stationed at for work at the same customer. And I think it was Victoria's Secrets. And Christopher and I are like tossing panties and palming bras as we're scanning them and throwing them into a trailer. Then we both stopped at one moment. We don't know which one we picked up. We was like, Miss Alvarez in California. I really feel really close to her right now. I don't know what it is. Something about this package. But we had tons of time to talk. And it really kick-started a friendship that has lasted, at least 10, 15 years, something like that.
Yeah, we've been friends a lot longer than we've been doing the show.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. So what was the first conversation you both had that inspired any idea of a podcast?
It actually happened. We were talking about, I think we were just talking about Noah's flood or something like that. And then there was another employee that came by and kind of inserted himself into our conversation. And he's like, you think that's real? And Jason, he took this moment and he was like, well, how do you want the answer? Do you want it philosophically, historically, or scripturally? And I was taken aback. I was like, I didn't know we could do this. So the guy, said historically or something like that. Jason gives him an answer and he walks off. And I like the little brother that I am, I like tug on Jason's shirt. I was like, hey, can we do that? Can we have answers like that? And he was like, well, there might be answers, but I only had one of those three. So it kind of started this idea that if there are these type of solid intellectual answers to things, we should know what they are because people are going to ask questions.
Wow. Okay, so what triggered the curiosity to dig deeper and question these mainstream narratives, as you guys really do well?
I think a lot of that happens partially by just the nature of who we are. Christopher and I are both fairly intellectual people that are constantly trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. And with that, I think you end up finding that there's not a lot of satisfactory answers
Yeah.
for what you see happening. And so for me, my particular journey happened to be I came across two people that really took this idea of you can be a serious follower of Christ and not check your mind at the door.
Yeah.
Like, that sounds phenomenal. What do you mean? And so I think the first guy I came across, the girl I was dating at the time, she introduced me to this guy who's a Christian apologist. His name is Ravi Zacharias. And I listened to his answers and breakdowns on just common questions. And I mean, everything this dude had a succinct answer to. And they weren't just one-off answers. They were part of a system of thought and a frame of reference. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's impressive. That's not what you hear a lot. You might hear these one-offs, but you don't hear an interconnected framework or a worldview perspective on how you address these questions. So that blew my mind. Then I remember I was cleaning up one day and I'm watching YouTube and I see this video that says Noah's flood, and it says session 5 Noah's flood 1 hour. And I'm like, there's no way you could talk about Noah's flood for an hour. Bet. Let me see. And I click on it. It's this video by this guy by the name of Chuck Missler. And this dude proceeds to talk about Noah's flood for an hour. And I proceeded not to clean a thing. I was literally at rapt attention. He got done talking about Noah's flood, and I was like, let's start at the beginning of this. I don't even want session 5 now. Take me back to 1 and walk me forward. And I got hooked on the guy. And those two really began to peel my mind back that what you see going on is not really what's happening, especially when Chuck Missler did an episode on transhumanism. And I
Wow.
remember being next to Christopher and listening to another guy by the name of Tom Horn, who also did a talk about transhumanism. And I was like, I've never heard this thing about transhumanism. What is going on? And this is where like the Christian world met the real world. And both of these guys, Tom Horn and Chuck Missler, they are both deep followers of Christ, but also very intellectual. And they treat you like you're smart. So they treat you like you ought to understand two things: the world going on around you and your Bible. And I was like, I don't understand either one. And they started using both of those to peel back the layers of what's happening. And I was like, I'm hooked. Like, you mean
Wow.
to tell me that there's a way to process and evaluate this information from a Christian perspective? I am down. Like, give me more of that. And that started like this pursuit that I've been able to put down.
That's amazing. What
Yeah.
about you, Jason? What was your first like curiosity when you started questioning something?
Um, things were
Well,
kind of rough from what
Oh, sorry,
did you say
Christopher.
something?
Christopher. Go
there we
ahead.
go.
Sorry, Jason.
things for me were kind of rough growing up. There's a bad divorce, and we were kind of in and out of the court system, and in and out of church and things like that. So it created this like when you couldn't trust the court system to look after your needs. Um, as a child, that speaks a big thing, right? Like, this is the institution, police officers are supposed to keep you safe and that type of stuff. And here's the actual inner workings of that, not looking out for your best interest. And when
Wow.
that didn't work, we had the church, and the church was not necessarily there to help, hold us together. And I specifically remember a time when things got physical with me and my stepdad, young child. And one of the people from the church kind of took us to Tim Hortons or something like that. I was kind of young. I don't remember exactly. And the whole conversation was, why did you use that bad language? I was like, the dude was hitting me, and this is the conversation that we're having. So it really, in the mind of a child, has you question, like, who can I trust? What can I look to? And one of the things my dad said a lot growing up was, it wasn't who tells the truth, but who tells the most believable lie that is going to be successful in the world. So yeah, I grew up with all these questions and tried to make sense of it on my own. And then I met Jason, and here's this dude that, because he had been introduced to the, people that he was talking about before, I was like, this guy is smarter than me, and he's connecting these dots. I was like, whatever he has got, I want some of that. So that's kind of what started the curiosity, but then also kind of still binds our friendship, is the desire to want to know and understand. And we're more concerned with accurate thinking than just wanting to be right. We'll drop whatever our thoughts were as soon as we, are introduced with a better idea or something that actually makes more sense. And that's what's constantly holding us together and pushing us towards Jesus Christ.
And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm here now, because that I see that bonding with you two, and I think it's fascinating. It never feels like anything's forced. You have that realm to think and grow. Yeah, congratulations for finding each other and getting that synergy. So, next question is: how has religion helped you guys structure your outlook on life? Because obviously, it's clearly had a positive effect on your podcast production ethics. I just want to say I don't really follow any religion. I'm a Manchester City fan, which doesn't mean much to most people. But what I found listening to your podcast is that it's actually through conspiracy. I think one of your guests said this the other day. I feel the same. Through conspiracy is leading me closer to some form of God, and I feel like I need that right now. So when I listen to you guys talking about scripture, before I'd probably feel a bit like, ooh, this is not something I should be listening to. Whereas now I'm warming to it in a very natural way. So thank you for that. But yeah.
Well, that's first off, that's pretty incredible. But I'm glad you shared that, because a lot of times I'm talking with people that have kind of gone through this process with me, and I remember all of the steps prior to maybe a moment where we start a podcast, somebody listens to it, and they're like, "Hey, this is really interesting." Like, I remember the arguments. I remember Christopher being like, "We should start a show," and I'm like, "Christopher, you should shut it up, because this is going to be a whole lot of work. I really don't want to do a show." Right? I remember my sister, my older sister, actually sitting down and being like, "You and Christopher really should deeply consider doing a show." And by deeply consider, I mean you should do it. And I don't want to hear any excuses. Of which I began to offer some very poignant responses of, I don't really want to do this. I had done a couple online projects before. I knew how much work goes into it, but more than that, I know how people look at you, right? You do all of this work and the people are looking at you like, you're crazy. And this is not that important. And there are other things that we could be doing. So I don't know why you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
And I think it was just absolutely a stroke of genius on God's part to orchestrate things so that I could meet somebody like Christopher. Because prior to that, I wouldn't have had a lot of the motivation to still stick out the pressures. But because I met a like-minded person who, in my opinion, is actually probably smarter than I am, but provides a lot of the an environment for me to actually explore topics that other people would be dismissive about.
Yeah.
It produces it produces the framework for where we can actually produce some fruit from these type of conversations. Like, I know some people would hear us talking and they would just be like, "What are you two talking about? Like, this is so left field." I'm like, "Yo, I don't care if you don't know. At least this cat gets it." So I talk to him. We can make 4 more left turns and be way far out in left field, But the funny thing though is that having those conversations in a vacuum would be one thing. The real value is that the conversations always need to go back within a religious framework.
Yeah.
Right. Everything has to fit within that. Else we're just spouting off stuff. And we have had some crazy conversations Like I've had conversations with Krista on the phone that I have to remember I'm at work and I could get fired. But I'm just having a conversation with my best friend, and we're like, "So, dude, like, what is your opinion on butt sex?" And I got people looking at me, what are you talking about? I'm sorry, I'm conducting a poll, just something. I'm just taking some votes here. And we'll have like a far out conversation, and then we'll bring the conversation back around to the Bible. We're like, this is awesome. And I think if you didn't have that, if you didn't have a religious structure to look at it, I think you actually would fall back into the mainstream narrative because that's what it's designed to do. Like one of the things we talk about on the show is this false reality overlay, right? It's constantly trying to navigate you back under the power of a satanic control matrix without you realizing it. So if you don't have a consistent framework that actually addresses some really key components of life, like origin, identity, meaning, morality, destiny, you're not going to actually be able to have a consistent framework for which you're evaluating things you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then you just get one-offs, you get these ideas that you might hold on to that actually could be mutually exclusive. They could actually be contradictory to one another. And you could be suffering some form of cognitive dissonance, but you're not aware because you don't have a framework to plug it into. So I think that's super important. But then on top of that, because we talk about so many esoteric things that can be at the slightest bit unnerving, when you really start digging into it, if you don't have this particular religion, if you don't have Christianity, then I think what you get is you get a sense of hopelessness. And so having that framework is so important because it continues to provide hope, and hope, I think, fuels people to move forward. So
Yeah.
I think for me, I wouldn't just say religion in a traditional sense. I know what people mean by that, but I think deeper than that, it's about having a relationship with Jesus Christ, because that's the thing that really fuels us forward. And that's where I think we found even the most traction with people when they're like, you guys aren't just a conspiracy show. I've heard those. You guys tend to move more towards connecting this to a relationship with Christ, which I haven't heard. And I'm like, that makes all the difference. But that was one of the things Christopher and I argued about the most. And by argued, he was like, we should connect it to Jesus. And I was like, that sounds stupid. I want to connect it to Jesus because I don't want to be one of those type of Christianese type shows. And it's just
Right.
wild. It tends to be the thing that people tend to appreciate the most, which is why you can't listen to me all the time. But that's not for
Yeah.
you, Christopher. You listen all the time.
I think if you was gonna go down the religious road, like way more apparent, I probably wouldn't have tuned in. But no disrespect to anything, but the way you do that so masterfully, and I've been dying just to be able to talk to somebody about something that's been bugging me, people, aware and not judgmental. And it's very, very rare, especially where I live now. I've lost a lot of friends over the COVID scandal and stuff. And I'm just like, maybe if I can talk to somebody like you guys, I reached out to you. Not only would I get some answers, but I might get a little bit of a blessing as well. I really feel like my soul is seeking that. So I feel like I can get a few things out of this conversation, not just information. Thank you for that. Next question, we're going to talk about equipment. What equipment did you start out with, and how has your equipment evolved since?
Well, we started with I've got to back up a little bit. Jason has been leading the charge on equipment and production value of the show. I'm definitely the guy that's like, I've got a good idea. I'm just gonna start, and then I'll figure out all that stuff later. And Jason's the one that's like, no, we have to get all of this stuff before we even begin.
Yeah.
So that kind of back and forth, I think, works really well. One that can propel us into something, but also make sure that it's a refined product. So we started with the Rodecaster Pro and Rode mics, I think is what we started with. Because we wanted to get as close to industry standard, that we could afford.
Yeah.
And then, after doing the podcast for a little bit, we upgraded to the Rodecaster Pro 2, and now we have the Shure SM7B microphones. I can't ever remember because
I'm using Shure. Yeah, they're good.
Okay, yeah. So that's really been the only major changes to our audio.
What headphones do you have on? because I don't see the Joe Rogan head.
Oh, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. We did start with the Joe Rogan like over the ear headphones, but now we're using shirt and ear monitors.
Ah,
So it looks a lot better, especially like with the green screen. I noticed that sometimes like it doesn't, fill in between the headphone and the head. So all of these decisions to make progress as far as our equipment are pushed by Jason, and probably will continue to be pushed by Jason in the future.
so would you is when you listen to your early episodes, can you tell a big difference now in the production, the sound?
You can tell a difference, but I think that Jason was so keen on pushing production value in the beginning that we can look back and
Ah,
still be proud of that product. It's still worth listening to, even though I think that we sound a little bit better now. We're a little bit more refined.
yeah, I'm a year into mine now, and I've started playing around with more things and realizing I was in like an echo mode. And yeah, it takes a bit of time. And then when you listen back, you're like, you do a really good podcast and the sound's not right. You're like, damn. So it has to be perfect now. All right. Next question is, I personally love how you guys have evolved the sound effects. That's the next stage for my podcast. What tips can you offer to us newbies?
Let's see the sound effect game. That's hilarious because that was an accident. I think so around like episode 3. Um, I was editing and I had switched gears. It was like late at night, and I switched into this just weird mindset of, you know what, screw it. I'm gonna play around. And so like more of my gregarious personality came out. And I remember I think we were doing something where we recorded and I changed my voice and I was like, hello, Lord. Lord, it is I. And Christopher's like, why are you changing your voice? I was like, because you have to be humble when you talk to the Lord. And I was like, what's great behind this? Like, I need thunder and I need like magical fairy dust or something. I was like, I wonder if you could find that. And I ended up finding it on this site that we used for our music and for our sound effects. But I remember sprinkling it all in and like throughout that episode, just different things. And Christopher listened to it and he goes, from now on, this is the standard. You're not allowed to do anything else but like this. And I was like, oh man, it was a joke. I didn't see that backfiring on me. It becoming something else I got to do. But since then, I think we've kept up that standard, not in every show, but when appropriate,
Yeah.
finding where you can do. And I think it helps the listener experience because again, we deal with a lot of deep, dark, possibly depressing content. And where you can lighten it with humor, where you can lighten it with a sound effect or whatever, helps take people out of that and just loosen the tension for a moment so that you can get
Yes.
back to
That's
some of the
very
other stuff.
was very well put that, because I was just practicing my presentation with a friend last night, and
Mhm.
at one point she was like, "Oh my god, my head's blown. I need a little like tune or something to bring me down."
Right,
uh,
right.
so
And I
how
had
do you
somebody that, oh,
how,
go ahead.
do you do this in the editing process? You don't do it live, right?
For the most part, most of that is put in post.
Yeah,
Uh, some things are done live, like certain effects, like some of them, like our we call truth bombs. Like when we
yeah.
make a really good point, that'll be done live. The crowd clap is live. Sometimes the crickets are live, just depends on what happens. But for the most part,
Ah,
Those are
so
live.
what are you using for that? What have you got? What have you got?
the roadcaster,
Ah, the
we put
roadcaster. Sorry, yeah.
yeah, we put it in on the sound pads on the roadcaster so they can be played. It's a touch sensitive pad, and we'll fire off different things from that. But the
Right.
vast majority are put in post, just depending on the feel of the show.
Right. How do you edit
And
your music in and out as well? This is a question from one of your Patreon guys, right?
Yeah, I think Kelly T asked that question. That's a great question. How do we do the intro and outro music? We throw it up to the angels in charge of music, and we say, "Please, go on something decent."
that's
No,
what
we
I
actually
do. I'm like, here, Angel Jason, do something with this.
do something with this. Sprinkle some magic dust on that. We use well. First off, we were talking a moment ago about when you start out, kind of putting some forethought into things. There's a lot of different thought that has gone into the structure of our show, and it's developed over time. But when it comes to the intros and outros, we have a standard intro, which is pretty much, this is Operation Red Pill, all of that goes on the front end of all of our episodes. But then based on the show segment, we have specific music for the show segment. So like if we're doing a Snakeheads episode, that has its own intro. If we're doing a Film of Your Eyes, that has its own intro. Or if we're doing a guest spot, that has its own. And we use a service called Artlist, which provides royalty-free music. It's one of several different services that you can find online. And I'll spend maybe a couple hours here and there just going through different music clips and collecting anything that moves me a bit. Anything I can bob my head to, anything I'm like, oh, that sounds nice. I have no idea what I'm gonna use it for.
Yeah.
But I'll download it, save it. And I started also building up a collection of tracks and then finding out where those tracks might fit. Like there's a folder we have for just dramatic reading. There's one we have for guest, and when you have a guest intro. But recently, I came across a couple pieces of music that inspired this idea that, right after we introduce the title for the show, we're like, Christopher, we got to talk about X, Y, and Z. I was like, if you just had this music come in right on the downbeat, it would be very cinematic. And I find for me, I think cinematically. I've watched a lot of films, and trailers I actually like more than I do the film. And I find trailers are cut differently. They have a different language to them than the actual film does. And it's almost like you need a trailer editor who just can edit a film based on that whole language of how trailers go. And I find that it's really imprinted on me. So I end up cutting some of the episode almost like a trailer. Like, what would be interesting if I was the audience and I got to listen to this? These guys have bantered for like 2 or 3 minutes. All right, I need something to bring me back in so that I can focus. And we normally use music for that. And setting up the intro point and the exit is all done in post to line it up with the timing and the downbeat and all of that. So just it hits right. And I remember sharing with Christopher, I think the last one we did, or the first time I had that idea was when we did the show with Celeste Solum. And we had to do the guest spot for that one. And I remember sending Christopher this track, like, dude, I got a great idea. He's like, not again. You changed. I'm like, no, but this one is good. Like we have this ongoing joke that because I change so many things on the fly, I have to be able to justify the change. Right. So if it's not a good change, then it's like, dude, you're just wasting our time. We got to have something good. So I pitched it to Christopher and he was like, I actually really like that track. I think this will be dope. Yeah. And we executed with Celeste and it went off, I thought, pretty well. So it's kind of become part of our structure where we'll introduce after we've done the main intro, introduce what the title is again for anybody that's forgotten, play the music, and then do a transition phrase or question into it to grab the person's attention, because we're trying to constantly keep the person's mind engaged because it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, that's the key. That's the key answer right there, keeping people engaged. Well, congratulations. And the next one.
I wanted to.
Oh, go on.
Hang on. Before we go on, I just want to kind of emphasize, we talked about effects and all of this stuff. Like Jason is done a lot of work in helping refine me and how we do the punch-ins and the effects and things like that. But something that I don't know if we've even talked about it on our podcast before, but this seems like a fitting place to do it. Our standard show outro has got this really sweet music track that Jason put together. And then at the end of it, if you notice, there's some sound effects, there's some other music going on, some explosions. And just the way that his mind works cinematically, like he just said, there's so much of even Jason and I's relationship that's tied up in there. Yeah, like you hear this military song, like what is it? Shoot, I can't think of what I
think it's from
the lyric
Unit.
is. Yeah, but it's the theme song.
Round up. Yeah. Here we go.
Yeah.
So that it was one of the first shows that we kind of watched together to bond and talked about, military tactics and the things that we saw in the show and things like that. So it's got that. It's got some Top Gun in it. Like just in this little segment, because of the way Jason's mind works and because how good he is at editing, it kind of is a nod to our friendship. And it's how we wrap our standard episodes. I think it's pretty sweet.
That's awesome. I know how much Jason loves Top Gun. Me too. Anybody that says they don't like Top Gun, something wrong with you people. Now
whoa,
you both.
Adam, say that again, because we have a listener, Megan, who does not like Top Gun, and I'm constantly arguing with her about it. I need you to say that one more time.
I'll tell you now, if you don't like Top Gun, something wrong with you.
Thank you.
That whole soundtrack was kick ass, man. You both have full-time jobs, and Christopher, you have two children. I have one child myself. He's 12. How do you guys plan and find the time to do such intricate research for each show?
A lot of it is just hard work and kind of dedication to the cause. Like we agreed that we were going to do this, and the reality is people make time for things that are important to them. You know,
Yeah.
it's the rare person that it's just sitting on the couch twiddling their thumbs going, "Oh, I don't know what to do to fill this space." You know, nature abhors a vacuum, so if we have time in our lives, it's going to naturally get filled up with something. So yeah, we try not to waste our time. And it's interesting, even before the pandemic, I think studies were showing that the average American spent more than 3 hours a day in front of the television.
Yeah, that's
And
crazy.
you do that every single day. At the end of the week, that's 21 hours. What productive thing could you take on in your life with even half that? 10 hours of investment a week. You could get a lot done. So it's very difficult. Like I think I even recently told Jason that the hardest thing about my corporate job now is figuring out how I'm going to do Operation Red Pill stuff in
Yeah.
that day. Whether it's before I get to work, if I got time on break or whatever, if I have to stay late to work on something. But we're all given the same amount of time. I think you just have to be very serious and willing to give up some of the fun things if you want
Wow.
to take on something like this.
Your children, are they old enough to listen to this yet or not?
No,
Whether they're old enough or not, I think Christopher is going to make sure they listen.
Oh, right.
The
yeah.
earphones right on. Hey, if you can't speak this word, it's fine. You need to get saturated first in this.
Yeah, they're pretty young. My oldest is 3, my youngest just turned 1.
Yeah.
But I've definitely made it a point to fill the atmosphere with educational stuff, knowing that it's well beyond their capacity to understand now. But the idea is that if they grow up hearing these terms like irreducible complexity, time dilation, I even
Nice.
found children's books on Newtonian physics and rocket science and things like that, just because I want it to be a normal thing. Not that they have to be a rocket science or start a podcast or anything, but the idea is that they are not overwhelmed or put off because something seems,
Yeah.
outside of what they grew up with. So
That's
I gotta
amazing.
say,
Go on.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, please. Go on, Jason.
I was gonna say, being on the outside and watching Christopher, a lot of times, I'll be talking to my mother about certain things, how much time this is taking up, or what have you, or she's concerned, like, man, you've been putting a lot of hours in on this. And her first question normally is, so how is Christopher? How does he do it with the kid? I'm like, listen, Christopher's all right. Worry about me. I am your son. He'll be fine. But she's like, no, but he has a wife and kids and all of that. And I think it's normal to think sometimes that it's harder, for the person who has the wife, the kid, the family, all of that. And it certainly has its unique level of challenge. But one of the things I appreciate about Christopher, number one, is that this isn't just a side thing for him. This is like who he is. Right. And so
mhm.
because this is who he is, there are things that he's doing out of that pot of who he is that encompasses or influences the rest of his life. And I like that he doesn't segment it off. We bring the wife in, bring the children in. This is who we are. But likewise, I really appreciate the fact that even though Christopher has, in some respects, less time than I do, um, there's a sensitivity that we both are putting in time to make the show work. Right. And so it's not just hey man, you're single, you don't have the problems I got to deal with. So could you just pick this up? Or vice
Mhm.
versa. There's a sensitivity to what we both have to deal with, and not a sense of what's harder for me than it is for you, which I think is
Yeah.
so beautiful because it allows us both to have our different levels of what we put in, but also appreciate the unique sacrifice and challenges of what each person does. And you don't find that every place. You know, that's what one of the things that really helps makes this show tick.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
certainly resonates with me as a fan. You can tell how much hard work goes into it, how you can synchronize your ideas so well as well. And the other thing is are you still doing this show at, as far as I remember, you used to go to Christopher's house, you had like a whole room kitted out. Are you still doing that? Or are you remote now?
We're actually remote now.
Right.
It used to
Yeah,
be,
when
yeah, we would go to Christopher's house, but then he decided to get this bright idea of having another child, and then that killed it. I'm not bitter at all, as long as you can't tell. You know, and that forced us to actually have to do things remote.
Does that affect you being apart, or it's no problem?
I mean, there's an emotional effect just because we really enjoyed hanging out, being in the same space. You know, we're not just co-hosts; we are actually best friends. So it was cool to get together. You know, throw something on the grill, order a pizza. You know, we're actually hanging out in that space. So that's missed a little bit. But the production value actually has been able to go up a little bit. Because like if you're
Mm.
sitting in the same room and I cough or sneeze, it's also through his microphone, and you know, you can't mute yourself and things like that. So being remote, it gives us an opportunity to streamline the channels and things like that. So it's a little bit of pros and cons to it for sure.
Okay, great. Now, could you walk us through the stages of compiling a show?
Simply put, and we can expound on it a little bit, but we typically go from concept uh, to research, and then actual show idea, topic flow, integration to other ideas, things like that, and then we'll schedule a time to record it. Once it's on the schedule, then we'll do the research, put together the studio notes and sound clips. Most of the audio clips that go in live are typically done from me, just because of the way that we interact with the product. Jason does a majority of the work, if not all of the work, in post production, and a lot of the research and show notes and things like that I do on the front end. So if I find a clip or something that I think is pertinent to the um, episode, I'll add that in and put it in the notes and get that downloaded and things before we start.
And then if I
Then
see
we
something
record.
that's interesting that was said in the middle of it, I'll go back and try to find, like, if he references something or if I reference something, I'll try to find a clip of it if I can, so the audience knows exactly what we were talking about, and then, you know, you get that interplay between that. Go ahead, man.
Right. Then we spend the time to sit down and actually record it. Then we have to create several different things, web pages, because we have a website, so you have to create a page for each thing, a post for Spotify, a post for Patreon, and then get all of those things scheduled. Then Jason takes on the post edits, so he goes in, he cuts out mistakes, things like that, patches together, really refines the show.
Yeah.
Um, and then we have social media posts to promote the episode that comes out, and then schedule it and link all that together after the fact. So it's a pretty extensive process to go from concept to actually getting it out to the people.
Do you ever rehearse the show first, or you just go first take based on time, I guess?
Um, in the very beginning, there was certain things because I naturally am a little bit more stoic.
Yeah.
So if I had a nickel for every time Jason was like, "You need to say that again," there was no emotion in it. That by itself could fund the entire show. But
Oh, that's
so early on, he actually had me. This is interesting. We haven't talked about this. Early on, he actually had me run through different scenes of movies and kind of recite or play the part. Like I think one of them we did was Lion King. Disney's easy, unfortunately, because we have so much of it ingrained in us from childhood that we can say, you know, that we can go back and forth. So we would go back and forth and play through these movie scenes and try to recreate the character's emotion, the things that changed in what he said, to be able to adapt that to the podcast. That if I'm saying something and explaining something, that you want your tone and cadence to reflect that and be easy on the listener. It reminds me a little bit. I watched a documentary on how to perform music. And they said one of the things that makes you a really good performer is that, like, if you're singing about clouds, like actually thinking about clouds and having your voice. So you got to be on key, you got to be in time, you got to be with the music, but then even each concept that rolls off of your tongue has to reflect, the tones and cadence reflect what it is that you're talking about. And even though the audience doesn't pick up on it, those are vital things in interacting and engaging your audience. So early on, Jason has kind of helped refine that. But as far as like doing the episodes now, we don't rehearse them. We do extensive work on the front end, looking over our studio notes. Does this work? Does it flow? Do we think that we can engage back and forth here? And then we just record it. And sometimes, like I said, Jason will be like, nope, you got to do that over because there was no emotion in your voice.
Ladies
Jason,
like that.
welcome to the
Jason definitely has the best poker face. Okay. So do you guys record only on Sunday, or you have another day in the week now?
Primarily, it's just Sundays. There are one-offs that we'll do on Saturday, but because of our work schedule, literally Sundays are about the only day that we can guarantee that we can get together. I mean, like Christopher has to raise his kids like for 2 hours and be a husband for an hour and a half. So we kind of let that happen on Saturdays, and Sundays are pretty much our only day.
Do you still go to church? Is that a big deal for you every Sunday?
It's going to church, I think, is a pretty important thing for us. But one of the things that Christopher and I have talked about, and a lot of this changed during the pandemics. For a while, we were going to the same church together, and then things slowly kind of shifted a bit. I think more than just going to a church is realizing what the church is.
Yeah.
And the church isn't the building that we go to. It is actually the community that we create. Now, there is a place for, where you send your money, how you support some of the things that are going on in your community and things like that. But more than that, it is really the community that we create with like-minded believers, in the space that we can create for people who are maybe exploring Christianity to feel safe with it. Right? Like that's a huge component. Outside of that, though, I think we still try to take in content from the local churches when we can, and then carry out this particular ministry mandate that we have, which unfortunately right now just has us being able to meet on Sundays. As sure as we get to a place where we can meet on another day and pick back up, going to a church like that, I think Christopher and I would definitely be on board doing that.
Yeah. So has the show become a heavier workload than you first expected? Because the sheer amount of work that you guys put into each episode is just very hard for me to fathom how you manage to execute each episode so smoothly. It would usually take a beginner podcast it'd probably take them a year to do what you do in 3 hours. How do you do that?
A lot of the magic is Christopher. Because I mean, first we got so much of the research that he does, which is phenomenal. And that was okay. I don't think we've talked about this on another show. When we first started out, like Christopher was saying, that there was a lot of front end work that we did to kind of refine the tone of the show, right? But one of the things we were doing is we knew we had so much information to get through. We tried it first with minimal notes. We're like, hey, this will be good. We're going to get together, do a 1 hour show. We'll knock this out the park. Like 5 seconds into the first show episode, we were like, I don't think it's going to work without notes.
Yeah.
So we stopped the whole thing.
So why is it not gonna work without notes?
Because you like to ask questions that people aren't prepared for, so they sound stupid. That's why it wasn't gonna work.
Was it transhumanism, or what was the question?
No, it was like, what does it mean to be human, or what is humanism? How would you define humanism?
Yeah.
I'm like,
yeah.
I define it as a co-host that's about to be dead for asking me a question like that on air.
First episode we ever tried, no notes. Jason goes on talking about how humanism is been adopted in society, and I was just, as innocent as I could be. I was like, so how would you define humanism? And man, I thought he was going to take a knife out of the drawer and stab me. So at that moment, we were like, okay, we need notes.
So we
Yeah.
started doing that, and the notes became like a script, right? Because we knew there was so much we had to get into. We basically created a script like when we were going through our Ultra series. And then I got burnt out because I was basically doing the script and I was doing both sides of it. I was doing my response and Christopher's response so that we could get through the flow of a show.
Yeah.
And by the time I think we got to episode 4 or 5, I was mentally just spent. Like I had nothing else. And we sat down and recorded. And I was like, Christopher, I got nothing. And he was like, well, this is the one part that I really need for you to come through because I don't have anything about this content. I don't know anything about New World Order. And I'm like, how do you not know about New World Order? We've been talking about it forever. And so he ended up sitting down and starting to do some notes. And I think the Holy Spirit, I think really God must have just stepped in and helped because we went from having nothing on paper to having 4 additional 3-hour episodes from the notes of us just sitting there going, okay, so we need to talk about this, and this. Oh, don't forget that. Oh, Jason, yeah, remember when you told me this? No, I don't remember that. Okay, I remember. Let me write that. And we just went through it. It was like 4 extra episodes in this Ultra series that we were doing. But from that point forward, Christopher ended up taking over doing a lot of the research and structuring the show notes, which is actually really cool because then that changed some of our processes and opened up space for us to be able to do different things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting.
To specifically and directly answer your question, absolutely. The show is now so much more of a workload than what I realized going into it. Jason probably had a little bit better idea because I
told you I want to
specifically
do it.
right, he didn't want to do it, and I was like, no, look, and this was my pitch from the beginning. I was like, look, we can do 1-hour episodes. All we have to do is record is one Sunday a week for 4 or 5 hours. We can record the whole month's worth of episodes in one sitting, and that's all it's going to take is one day a month. We can do a podcast, and it has never, from the very beginning, only been one day a month.
Yeah, I figured that. Well, I'm so happy you've not give up. You kept going because I'd be lost without you.
Oh no. See, I appreciate that. Adam, I think one of the things that happens, like Christopher and I are both truck drivers. And I remember when I went for truck driver training, um, just driving the truck seemed like a mental overload. And I
Yeah.
remember telling myself, I think I told Christopher too, like, I don't think I'm gonna be able to talk to anybody as a truck driver ever. Like, there's no more phone calls, no more nothing. I don't have the mental space to talk
Yeah.
because of how much stuff I have to pay attention to. This is new. I got to read signs as a regular motorist. I don't normally pay attention to signs, but now as a truck driver, they have all these new signs up that I never saw. There's too much of a bandwidth for me to be able to talk. And then I started noticing once I got into trucking, I was making phone calls. I'm joking. You can eat. Like, I'm like, where did I find all this to do all of this stuff? Right. And it's kind of cool. Your mind tends to compress this information and make it like to make it second nature so that you have a lot of front end bandwidth to be able to do things. I think the same thing happens with the show. Like where we started off, it was a ton of work on the front end. And then as we begin to get workflows together, we got our processes together, we start getting better at things, it compacts itself. And now you have new bandwidth to take on new stuff. What I keep finding is that every time we get new bandwidth to take on new stuff where we just get a break, Christopher likes to slot something else in there. Like, you know what would be great for us to do? Let's launch a merch store. I'm like, no, we just got a break. But I think that's the nature of the show as it grows.
Yeah.
You get a compacting that happens, and then you get more space to continue to move forward. So I would say, and Christopher, you can answer for yourself. I would say, yeah, the show has gotten much harder, but in some respects, it's also gotten easier because there are
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I would agree with that.
I just trying to visualize you guys driving trucks and stopping every 5 minutes to make notes. It must be the most frustrating job when you got all the thoughts in your head and you can't write it down. How do you do that?
It's a lot of it is that God has blessed us, but also we're very practiced in training our minds to focus and pay attention to things. Because
Right.
one of the things when we were consistently going to church, it really bugged me. We'd go, sit through the sermon or whatever, and then you talk to people at lunch after, and they couldn't remember what the pastor said. I'm like, why are you going if it's lunch the same day and you can't remember? Like, how is anybody benefiting from this? So there has been a lot of effort in training ourselves, and even that goes back to the beginning of our friendship. Like we had, you're gonna hate me if I ask you now, but we would have things that we would try to remember, like the 5 characteristics of the empty self. So
7.
while is it 7?
Yeah.
You forgot.
Yeah, I did. We're not perfect, but no, we turned it into a game a lot of times in the beginning, so we're slinging panties at Victoria's Secret, and in the midst of some of the heaviest moments, we'd quiz each other on certain things, to force us to focus and force us to remember. But beyond that, technology has been really beneficial. Like one of the tricks that I've found is I can hit a button on my headset and I can be like, make a note, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And it saves these little notes for things that I really don't want to take the chance of forgetting.
So you take audio recordings when you're driving? Or yeah?
Yes, sometimes. Yeah.
That's a really good idea. Okay. Have you ever ditched an idea even after a bucket load of research for any reason? Like maybe it was a premature idea, for example.
That's a really good question. I don't think that we actually have.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the behind the scenes before we even decide on a particular topic it goes back and forth between Jason and I a lot. So we'll present the idea, we'll argue about it, whether it's a stupid idea, whether or not we're in right standing with it. And then if it's even suggested, hey, could we do this as an episode? Jason's really good at like, I love this fact, but it's got to be able to apply and fit into our show somewhere. So we do a lot of that work on the front end before we ever slot it to be an episode, to invest the time to do the research for it. So I think the closest that I've come to throwing out an episode that we thought about is that we've wanted to do one specifically on blood. Like we've done one on blood, we've got our Bloodlines of the Illuminati series.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's banging. It's really, really interesting.
Thanks. But we wanted to specifically do one on blood, like Rh negative and the different characteristics of blood and how it works. And there was a couple of times that I was like, yeah, let me do some research and see if I can make this work. And I just didn't have the concept really well thought out. So I had to, ditch it. But that was before I, sat down to do the research.
Right.
Yeah, I think by research phase, we've already gone through a lot of the front end stuff to make sure that it's a viable topic. Can we see this actually working? What would the audience think of it? Does this sound interesting? I would tell you this, there were a couple that it's actually really interesting. There are a few episodes that, well, first off, I'm going to say, and I've said this on other shows, I think I'm a hard sell. So oftentimes
Yes.
come up and pitch. Shout out, Christopher will come up and pitch an idea. And I'm like, I don't get it. I don't see why this is going to be interesting. In fact, bro, since we're such good friends, I'll be like, this is stupid. I'm not getting it.
Yeah, and almost every time.
There are a couple, though, that stand out that I didn't like the show idea. Christopher stuck to it, and it ended up becoming a really popular episode. And not just popular amongst the listeners, but actually the content was like revelatory. And it was something that showed up in other episodes with other people. And I'm like, man, you mean that episode that I couldn't stand was actually really good? And so we almost tossed it out when we couldn't agree at first. Like, why is this going to be a good show? And there's some research that's done, but it was like, I think this would be great. I'm like, okay, see, the title I'm not getting, the concept I'm not getting. He refined a bit of that, comes back, and we do the show, and the show like flies out of the world. And I'm like, wow, who would have thought that show would be such a hot topic? Which goes to show you that you can't be afraid to start over. You can't be afraid to refine a process, but you also have to be able to stick to what you know. And I really applaud Christopher for being able to to withstand some of my kickback because the show has benefited from it, and I've benefited from it personally with what we talked about. But it's
I
very
just
rare that we talk about the whole idea.
I just want to say at this point that I don't miss a single episode of your show now, and there's not many shows that I listen to every episode. Every time I see the title, I'm like, yes, this is definitely resonating with me. I mean, I listen to Rogan, obviously, and I've been skipping a lot of Rogans. Like, it's too many comedians now. It's like I'm looking for that one guest that give me something new, you know. And with you, I
Right.
just take something new out of every episode. A lot of it I already know, but I just love. For me, I'm very similar to you that I need the pieces putting together, and I often struggle to try and do that on my own. And you guys are sort of relieving me of that duty. But there's also little things that I'll be like, oh yeah, I could add that, and that's why we're doing the show, and we'll get into some juice after this beautiful interview. Now, which episode has took the longest, would you say?
I would say it's probably the episode that we're recording, not right this moment, but today. We started half of the episode before we jumped on with you. We have to finish up the rest of the episode. It's the Bloodlines of the Illuminati, the DuPonts.
Yeah.
It has been more than 2 weeks solid. A lot of times I'm doing notes for two different episodes at the same time. It's been over 2 weeks solid of just DuPont bloodline research, reading from Fritz's book. We put together the links and resources, and there's 77 cited sources for this one episode.
Wow.
So it has taken a lot of work to compile this one, but I think it's going to be really good.
That's
I think this is
amazing.
gonna-
Yeah, I think that what you're doing with that, yeah, it's not easy information to put together as well, to find it, to put it together. That's what a lot of listeners might not appreciate, but I do. I mean, this information is not meant to be put together, is it? It's
No,
like a
it's
giant
not.
it's like a giant puzzle, and it's you can end up, you know, I went watching that National Treasure again because of the Cosmic Peach episode you did, and in that show, it's very similar to what you guys do. It's like it's a clue and another clue and another clue, and it's like, when are we going to find the end?
Right.
Just give me the
Yeah.
conclusion and let me move to the next topic, right? So yeah, well done for nailing them down, and yeah, and you do have a definitive start and finish point, and you as a listener, you feel like, wow, I've just downloaded a great chunk of that puzzle there, and I'm looking forward to the next. Now, as I mentioned before, I think it was the Great Deception podcast. Shout out to Matt. He was the first one, maybe, that mentioned you had done this Marvel Universe. A great little. I can't remember how many episodes it was. Was it 3?
You when we actually did it, like
Yeah,
which episode was? I think it was further in.
it was further.
Uh,
No, I mean,
the-
how many episodes was it? I can't remember. I think you did a couple. But yeah, this was the one where I went back and watched the entire Marvel universe in chronological order because you'd done such an amazing amount of research. I was like, how the hell can you dissect all them? I remember watching them Marvels when they came out, and I have a couple of friends in Vietnam that was like, they're like big Marvel fans, and I just was like, dude, they suck. And they were like, no, you don't understand the universe. And then and to be honest, because of you, when I went back, I think I watched it during the lockdown. I can't remember. Oh, I just after. No, it wasn't. It was just after the COVID lockdown. Sorry. Yeah, and it was a huge amount of work. It took me forever, and I was like, I was saying to my son, I'll wait for you to get home from school and we can watch the next one. I was firing through that, man. He's like, you already watched like 5 films? I was like, I'm sorry, dude. I gotta get through this shit. So I think this, maybe for me, it was the episode that gained you a wider audience. And do you feel that was the one episode that you was like, wow, we just got a ton of new listeners?
I think wasn't that Ryan Dean that we did?
So it was
'Cause we-
Ryan Dean. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
No, it was
Ryan
not
Dean.
Matt.
We did the. Yep.
Christopher did this Jedi mind trick thing on me. He asked me before we did the show. He was like, "Hey, what should we actually do for Ryan to get him on the show?" And I was like, "I don't know, man. We should probably have a couple ideas ready." So I think we pitched like 3 ideas, and then at the very end, Christopher says, and I was like, hey, why don't we just do a breakdown of the Marvel Cinematic Universe? And so we
Yeah.
pitched that to Ryan, and Ryan was like, yo, that sounds awesome. Let's do that. And I was like, what sounds awesome? I don't remember this. So Christopher Jedi mind tricked me to actually try to pitch that show to Ryan. But I do remember, I think we were on a business trip and we were down in Kentucky, right outside the Ark experience or the Ark encounter.
Yeah.
And we had to do the show with Ryan. And I remember we were like scrambling to do this show. Like we were freaking out. Ryan's one of our podcasting heroes. I remember listening to his content and just being blown away. And I
Yeah.
remember even shooting that stuff over to Christopher, like, you've got to listen to this cat. And for him to want to allow us to be on the show was crazy. So we sped down there, we got all our stuff together. We had like 14 different technical issues that we had to get through. We were like on a remote site. We're trying to hook up. There's hum in the line. We got all sorts of problems. We got to go to a Best Buy to get an adapter because we left something at home. The only
Yeah.
one is like 20 miles away. So instead of doing that, we go to Walmart. We get the last one that's on the shelf. We run back, hook everything up, and literally we fire it up, get Ryan on the show, and we do the whole show, and we get done, and we're like, uh-oh, we just changed our whole podcast name. We got to change our domain name, information, everything. So we run back, we're doing all of that, and while we're redoing our entire website, domain names and everything, we start watching the ticker on the podcast on who's listening. And we're used at that point to like maybe 10, 20, a top show is like 30, right?
Wow.
30 people listening. We're like, there's 30 people. You don't understand. This is dope. 30 people are listening to it. Ryan gets on and we're seeing numbers that we can't readily count on one hand. We're like, what is going on? Like it's up in the 80s, 90s, hundreds, 200s. Like it shot up. And from there, it kept going. So it was like a game changer getting on Ryan's show. It changed the whole thing for us because from Ryan, and then I think a few days later, Christopher sent me a text and he was like, "You've got to listen to this show," and it was Matt from The Great Deception.
Yeah.
And I think Ryan had been on the show and had referenced referenced us, the recording that we did, and then I think Matt actually went back and listened. He said something. And I
Yeah.
was like, "Yo, this is
So
crazy."
I listened to that and then went back to listen to your original one. So it was Matt
Oh,
for
wow.
me. I have to thank Matt getting me in there
Yeah.
because I started with Matt and he got me in the whole Tartaria thing, which it was like wow. And then I went to Ryan and then found you guys. So this is something that this is where I'm a year into podcasting and I don't have that social circle. I idolize the network that you've built. You've got Heidi and you've got I forgot his name now. The
Drew
Australian
Misson?
Drew,
Drew,
amazing.
yep.
Yeah, I love his stuff. And I know, I was really sort of, I was just like, I got to get involved with this. I gotta be part of this platform. I got so much to say. You listen. I just want to jump in. So for me, this is my Ryan Dean moment, and I hope I can do this little network justice.
Appreciate
That's
that.
awesome. Yeah.
So who you just mentioned a few, but who are the heroes in the podcast universe for you, aside from Ryan, aside from Matt, Drew? Is there anybody you want to give a shout out extra? Some shows we should be checking out?
It's interesting because as the show grows, so does that circle, right?
Yeah.
And our quote unquote heroes. It's hard to say at this point. We have been. It has been incredible we've had Gary Wayne on, we've had L.A. Marzulli, and it was really like Jason said in the beginning. He was like, hey, or I pitched the idea. I said, how do you, if you had to pick people that you never thought you could get on the show, who would they be? Would we pick these people, Celeste Solum, Gary Wayne, L.A. Marzulli, and asked, and these people actually, were able to come on our show. So that was cool. But then we find like I don't want to call it a monster, but as it grows, like we keep, expanding the topics that we cover and things like that. So that there's always something on the horizon that we're reaching for a little bit.
That's amazing. What makes a podcast great?
I would say having a co-hosts like Christopher.
Yeah.
That's
Thank
that's
you.
that's
Thank
what
you.
makes the show. Hey, you know what? I couldn't do without you, man. Um,
Same.
I think there are a couple things, but just before we go to that one, if I could dovetail off of what Christopher said, a couple people that I would like to give a shout out to. I mean, we already mentioned Drew, Matt, and Ryan. I think
Yeah.
those are definitely great shows. Heidi and Julia from Cosmic Peach,
Yeah.
definitely good. It's rare that you find females in this space.
Yeah.
And so I definitely like the fact that not only are they in the space, but they've taken a firm stance to actually talk about these esoteric things that people would shy away from, and they're able to bring a different perspective as females than what you get from the male side. But it's also they're also able to show people that, you know, just because you're a female, you don't have to be afraid of getting into this content. And
Yeah.
I
Good.
think that is dope. One of the people, like Christopher said, because of the nature of our show, a lot of times we're chasing down topics more than we are actual podcast shows. And
Yeah.
if we're for a topic, then we might be looking for a speaker, and we'll just follow the speaker. It doesn't matter what show you're on. I just want to hear what you're talking about so I can get content.
Yeah.
But I think one person for sure is probably it for me, there are a couple shows that stay in heavy rotation. One of those is Dan Duvall.
Yeah.
I love listening to Dan Duvall because typically I'm going to get stuff that not only connects dots, but it's super, super inspiring and very interesting. And it's constantly coming from a biblical perspective, which I think is most important. The other one is probably going to be a show like Blurry Creatures. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they are a fantastic show, constantly peeling the wool back on what is going on right outside that realm of what we think is real, which I love, and also from a biblical perspective. Those would be two that I would recommend pretty quick to people who want to dive in and get a good sense of what's happening.
That's amazing. I just want to say to Julie and Heidi that I love you both, and I hope I get you on the show. Especially to Julie, because I remember when she was doing the research for the Nephilim series that she did, that was really good. She was saying she was having technical difficulties, like things weren't recording, and I understand that. I've had that as well, and it can be a little bit scary, you know. Like even coming on here today, I was kind of like, there's a lot of things that I want to talk to you guys after the interview, and I'm like, I do get a bit panicky about it. You know, how far you can push the boat on Spotify with saying things or asking too many big questions, but just to hear a woman say that she was like, I don't care what happens, and she still ended up coming out with some serious content. I respect
Right.
that a lot. I think
Right.
there should be more ladies stepping out of that comfort zone, you know.
Exactly.
Now that
But
ties me into, have you ever had any issues with censorship warnings, you know, all this being shadow banned, things like that? How does that work out for you guys?
you know, right now, our show is at a level where I think we're skating just under the radar right now, which kind of has this weird relationship in my mind with the numbers, because I like to see the numbers grow for numbers' sake. But at the same time, I realize that the larger the platform you have, the more of a spotlight's put on you, especially with
Yeah,
the algorithm. And with the stuff we talk about, I appreciate skirting under the radar.
yeah,
But I think we have had a couple moments where we may have been shadow banned, like Christopher was pointing out earlier this year, that we had a dip in our numbers right about the time I think we did um Kinsey.
Alfred
Is that right?
Kinsey. Yep.
Yeah. Kinsey part 1 and 2. We had a dip that was uncharacteristic of where our averages are at. And he was saying, man, I think we really have gotten shadow banned right here. And luckily, the next week, thankfully, rather, it picked up. But we have had some issues running in with Instagram and other social media platforms where some content has gotten flagged as being, you know, false information or what have you. So we're starting to run into that, but nowhere near the level of some of our contemporaries. So I'm really thankful for that.
wow. I was just listening to a Sam Tripoli episode. I want to give a shout out to Sam Tripoli. He's really, really good as well. And they mentioned that the way to check if you've been shadow banned is you just put your name in on Instagram, and if your name's not at the top, then you've been shadow banned. And
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know how it works, but I definitely feel like sometimes watching the numbers, you get people coming up to you in the street like, "Oh, listen to your podcast," and I'm like, "That's interesting," because I've got like 20 people saying they've listened to it, and I've only got 10 on the Spotify. So you got to go off this intuition that that I think the better you get, the show's progressing the right direction, right?
Mhm.
Um, Now, do you ever feel anxious about the future of being able to openly publish content that goes against the mainstream narratives? This is a really good question.
No, that
I
is
did
a good
know
question.
Christopher pushed me into like this esoteric range that I'm not comfortable with. Now I have to consider it.
Yeah, it um I personally, and I can't necessarily speak for Jason here. I'm not so anxious necessarily at this point in society concerned about, getting censored or having our platform taken away, but it was a really eye-opening moment as we're going through Fritz Springmeier's book, Who Was Falsely Accused of Armed Robbery, and we're covering this guy John Wayne Todd, who for exposing the same things that we're exposing on our podcast, was accused of rape and murdered. I was like, it's not a very far line between the work that they were doing and what we're doing. And we had
Yeah,
several conversations that, do we really want to do this? Is this what God has called us to do? Are we willing to step forward knowing what the possible consequences are? So my concern, and maybe not concern, but I think the more real danger is what Jason and I specifically would be exposed to through the power and the influence of the elites, and not just taking away our platform.
interesting. Yeah, just a couple of interesting facts was that, Nikola Tesla was locked in the hotel the last years of his life, and apparently he was sending messages with the pigeons outside. That's how he was trying to communicate because he was so paranoid that somebody wanted to take him out and shut him up and make him look like an idiot or crazy guy. And another one
Mm-hmm.
that I read about was George Orwell. The name of 1984 wasn't 1984; it was some other name, and apparently he was frantically trying to finish this book and get it out before either something was to happen to him or before he knew he was going to die. And then apparently the original title, the book was taken away and changed to 1984 later. So we're not sure if that was his original intent or whether it became a narrative that they used to, foresee this dystopian future. So yeah, I
Okay.
think you gotta get it out while you can, and I think you've got to respect that radar for 100%. You got to be clever. You got to be almost Shakespearean, and we'll get into that in a little while. Now, what I want to know is that you're obviously you've got your religion and you've got this esoteric, curiosity. What kind of reaction do you get from your religious circle of friends, if any? Have you ever experienced any negative backlash, for example?
Go
Chris.
ahead, Jason. Oh, you want me to take it? It's
I'll
funny.
go first.
We're joking around about. There's a scripture. Joking around about a scripture sounds sacrilegious. There's a scripture that says a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown or within his home, and that's very much what we have experienced. Jason's got some people in his family that have really jumped on board and supported, but it seems like most of the people that thought it was a good idea for us to do this show, thought we had something to put out, have kind of fallen away a little bit. And those people closest to us, like even my mom, it was funny. I think it was about a month ago. She was like, I really thought you and Jason were kind of crazy, but I heard, found this other information, and you're not that far off in left field. And I was like, wait, how long have you thought that we were crazy, Mom? Like, I didn't know that you were holding on to this nugget. Um, so yeah, it's interesting that more people within our circle, specifically, quote unquote religious, because when I was going to church, there was a couple of things that came up that I went to the leadership and I was like, this isn't working. And it wasn't even far in, esoteric realms or whatever. They were just, I think one of the things was that our experience is enough to carry us through academia. That all the children need is like a youth camp experience, and they can make it through college as believers. And I was like, that's actually wrong. And you're setting people up to be deceived if you're not giving them sound intellectual answers. There is a reason, a thoughtful intellectual reason to believe what we believe. And if you're not equipping our people with that when they go into this realm of intellectualism and academia, then they're going to fail. And I got nothing but pushback from the religious institutions. So it's been really bizarre because, like Jason was saying at the very beginning, we had the idea that if we're not tying it to Jesus or landing it on Jesus, then we haven't finished the episode. So we were a little bit concerned that everyone outside of our circle was going to reject it, right? We're like, oh, well, the people in our circle, they're going to be okay with it, but everyone outside, they're going to, be put off by using the Bible and things like that. And it's been the polar opposite. Everyone in our circle most people in our circle think that we're crazy. And all the people on the outside are like, we love how you're able to connect this and you make the truth of the Bible relevant to the things that are going on today. It's really been a different experience than what we thought when we started.
That's really funny because I get called crazy all the time, and I don't think you guys are crazy. I think complete opposite. I think you're so well intuitive, and for me, it's like, yes, I found people like me.
Right.
Hallelujah.
That's great.
No, that's like spot on though, dude, because one of the things that Christopher and I were talking about when we first started was like, what type of show do we want to make this? And one of the things I told Christopher that I believe God had said to me was, make the type of show that you would want to listen to. Right. And that's a very peculiar type of show. I personally don't want to listen to a 1 hour show. If you are only talking to me for an hour, you're not going to be able to get as deep as I want to go. And so I'm trying to connect dots. I don't want necessarily superficial. That doesn't mean every 1 hour show is superficial, but there's only so far deep you can go within an hour. If you can give me 2-3 hours of solid content, I'll manage my own time. I'll manage what I can listen to on a daily basis until I finish it. I don't need it pre-broke up for me. I just want solid content. Don't waste my time. And so one of the things I was telling Christopher is I want to make sure that our show kind of reflects that we don't waste people's time, but I'm not sure who's going to accept and who's going to buy into that. And like Christopher was saying, it was really the exact opposite. Both of us have had to deal with less than stellar support from those who are closest to us. Now, normally
Yeah.
a couple people who have been really nice, but one of the things I noticed was for the people who were encouraging us at the beginning to get started and do a show, those were not the people that actually listened. And I've been fortunate enough that for me and my family, my mother and my older sister for sure, they've listened to like every episode. I don't know how much of the content they've caught because a lot of times they're like, "What did you say?" And I'm not quite understanding that. Which is like, cool. You at least took the time to listen. Other people in my family, and even friends close to me, some of them are like, "It's just too long. I don't have the time." Or some of them would be like, "I find it interesting, but I ain't got the time to listen to it." And you could take that for what it's worth. For some people, I get that. They got jobs where they can't listen like we can, like Chris and I can going down the road or stuff like that. They've got to really pay attention to stuff that's right in front of them. But also, like Christopher said, you find that people make time for what's important to them, right?
Yeah.
They make the time. It's hard to hear, I can't, it was too long. I couldn't get into that from somebody that may be sitting on the couch for 6 hours a day
Yeah.
watching television. You're like, nah, you've got the time, or somebody that, hey, if you just took 30 minutes a day, you can get through some of this. And what you find is that it's an interesting challenge that you end up having to experience when that thing happens close to home.
Yeah.
Because the takeaway would be, I had one of my friends at work go, you know what, you don't promote your show a lot. And I said, no, I don't. And they were like, why? I said, well, if I was going to be honest, I've had too many people close to me not show enough interest in it that it
Yeah.
has carried and kind of informed me that maybe this is not the thing that people want to talk about. And so
Yeah.
you don't want to put yourself out there for that level of just rejection because you've gotten that message earlier on from people closest to you. And I know Christopher and I have talked about it at length, how those who are close to someone that's in a creative process, you really play an integral role in informing or encouraging that person to continue to push forward. Like you
That's good.
don't have to be the person that comes up with the content, but you still can play a pivotal role in pushing that person forward by just showing interest,
Yeah.
by actually doing something a little bit different, maybe put on that person's content, listen to it, ask them a question or two, like, hey, I didn't get what you meant when you said that. What was that? And you'd be like, hey, you was listening? That's awesome.
Yeah.
Just having that type of support can be really important. And one of the things we found is that, man, the people that you would think that are in your religious circle that would probably be like, yo, this is dope, keep doing this, are not the ones that are like, I really like it. They're
Yeah.
the ones scratching their hick on why are you talking about this? Or they're the ones talking, hey, I'm sure there's more important things than this. I mean, I hear you. This sounds a little conspiratorial, but nah, I'm not really into it. And you find yourself, if you listen to them, you find yourself not wanting to do it. And that's why I said your statement was so, I appreciated it, because it reminds me of why we do what we do, why we put those hours in. Because there is somebody like us. It's like, I just want to hear dots connected. I'm really looking for truth. And I think that's happening at a broader rate than what the church, if you will, is really ready for. There really are people out there that want the truth and want to connect dots, and they need folk who are willing to do that for it.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, think about how much time people spend looking at celebrities and people they don't know, but they don't seem to spend time to support the little guys who are effectively around them. I just want to give a shout out to Darren from my workplace because he's this one guy. Every episode, I'll be sat at work and he just goes, "Hey, nice podcast, man," and that's it. It keeps me pumped for the whole week. It's like
That's
this real people listening. I mean,
Yeah,
my
I got
follow my
narrative.
my my following is fine for where I'm at, and I'm hoping that getting into this kind of this new stage now of getting on other podcasts that it'll reach out. But for me, that's not the most important thing. For me, it's like, what is my purpose? What is my content? Can I help? My podcast is called Made to Think, and you guys make me think all the time. I just had a flashback as to why I got into podcasting. I was having a rough time, and I have a friend who's like a multi-millionaire. He's done really well, and I asked him like, "What's the secret of success?" And he says, "Audiobooks." And I was like, because I love reading books, right? And I don't usually have the time, so I got into audiobooks, but I didn't have that concentration. Even as a DJ for 25 years, it's a different kind of concentration because you're mixing two things together. Whereas an audiobook demands like one focus. So what I found was going walking and listening to audiobooks. I was like, wow, this is cool. If I walk 10K, I can listen to 2 hours. I can get through a whole book in a day. And that's what triggered this whole listening to stuff, going to the gym. I have a little motorbike in Vietnam. I know Christopher's he's a big biker guy.
Yep.
So I drive around with my headphones on and I'm like, yeah, all right, if it's going to take me 30 minutes, that's 30 minutes of a podcast. I am never losing time not listening to podcasts now. So yeah, I busted 3 hours in the gym running on a running machine, listening to you guys. I'm like, please don't go 4 hours. I'm tired. I'm tired right now. Just this one episode. So
That's
that's
awesome.
amazing. Now, are there did you imagine that your podcast would become what it is today? Has it grown into a new kind of beast for you, would you say?
It's interesting because we're still very much just Jason and Christopher having a conversation.
Yeah.
Like even the fact that you reached out to us and wanted to interview us, we're like, man, this is so exciting. Like we really have been looking forward to this.
Yeah. I feel you guys need to step back a little, have a little limelight. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Love
we
it, man.
appreciate that for
Yeah.
sure. So there are a lot of things going on that is, kind of crazy and surreal. Like we have a merch store and we're like, we're just these guys that have this stuff. But on the other hand, when we started this, because we believe that God told us to do a podcast, Jason had the forethought to say, look, if we're doing this, then we need to be set up to do it right. Because if it does explode, if it does go somewhere, we need to do it in such a way that the foundation of Operation Red Pill can sustain whatever weight gets thrown on it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of crazy. All of the countries that we're into, people from Vietnam are reaching out, but we were braced for it. So in one hand, we're kind of prepared. On the other hand, we're still, just two guys, that can't believe that we're here right now.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
for me, I'm still shocked that people listen. Like every time somebody they're like, "Yeah, I love your show." I'm like, "You listen? You really do?" You're like, you don't put it on 2 speed and go through it." Like, no, like there are people who've been like, "Hey, I started at the beginning." I'm like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa. You went back to the first episode and went through?" They're like, "I've gone through the Ultra series multiple times." I'm like, "What? Are you
Yeah.
serious?" I gotta tell Christopher right now. Christopher, you won't believe it. It's really cool to see how it's grown. I can't say that I necessarily anticipated or foresaw that it would be what it is now, but I'm really happy to be along for the ride and see where it's going and see the people that it's affected and that it's impacted because I know what it's like to be out there wanting answers and not
Mm.
having sufficient answers, right? And feeling like you've got to do all of that hard work to try and connect these dots. That's not easy. So I think it's really cool when people are like, "Yo, I listened to this and this was the impact that it had on me." And I'm like super excited to see where the show goes.
Yeah,
To
I
see
think you've got a synergy there that is very unique. You remind me a little bit like my favorite cartoon, childhood TV show presenters. Like I couldn't miss a single episode. I got to listen to these voices. I need the voices. Um, is there are there any podcasts that you really would love to be guests on in the future, like what happened with Ryan Dean?
Yeah, actually, I'm trying my best. Me and Christopher are trying our best to get a hold of Dan Duvall. I wouldn't
Wow.
mind if you're on Dan's show or if Dan was on ours. I just want to talk to Dan.
Yeah.
I just want to have a conversation because every time I hear this dude talk, I'm blown away. One, because we're at similar ages, but we're not at similar depths of knowledge. His depth of knowledge far exceeds mine. And I would say it might slightly exceed Christopher's just by a little bit. But I'm always blown away by what I hear because it's not just knowledge, it's also a connection between what you deal with internally, what you're dealing with as far as the systems of the world that are designed to really destroy and corrupt you, and then specific entities that are at work and at play within the satanic control matrix. And I'm like, who puts all of that together? Like every time I listen, I'm finding out something completely new. And I'm like, I just want one conversation. I'm not even going to ask what the meaning of life is. I just want to talk and see what I can glean and get some of my own dots connected. I would love to just have a conversation with him. What about for you,
That's
Christopher?
Well, we've recently talked about Blurry Creatures because we
Yeah.
listen to a lot of their content. We have a lot of shared guests that they've had on their show that have been on our show, and more than just a couple people. We've heard that some of their top podcasts include Blurry Creatures and Operation Red Pill. So from that position, I think it would be really neat to put those two together and give the people what they want.
Doesn't it seem weird though? Like when your name is mentioned with blurry creatures, you're like, I think I'm breaking a rule. Like it feels like
Yeah,
a
it's
podcast rule. Like I'm not allowed to say that.
it's crazy.
Now, I was going to ask you like what your top 10 podcasts are, but we've already mentioned that. But I remember you mentioning some websites or YouTube channels that are really good to find like film breakdowns, for example. Is there any YouTube stuff you can give to the listeners that they should be checking out content wise? Especially these movie breakdown ones. I can't remember what you mentioned, Jason, in the past, but I'm interested in that.
I think one of them is Ryan Airy. Christopher, correct me if I'm wrong. It says Screen Crush, correct?
That is
Screen
correct.
Crush.
Okay,
Yep.
screencrush.com is a good one. And then
Or Screen
um
Crush at YouTube. I don't know if he has
Ah,
like his own designated website, but if you
right.
type in Screen Crush on YouTube, you'll find
And
him.
Eric Voss with Screen Rant.
New
Those
rock
two
Screen Run.
stars.
new rock
Eric.
stars. Is that what it is? Eric Voss is
Yeah.
new rock star. Okay.
Yes.
Those two are really good. And then if you're looking for more of a Christian breakdown that deals not so much with thematic ideas or deals with Easter eggs, but more so deals with the spiritual messaging that's embedded in the film, LED Ministries is really good at doing that. They really rock on doing some of these teardowns from a Christian perspective and really showing how there is satanic messaging that's embedded behind the film and the symbolism that's used. And then
Okay.
maybe
Oh. Now, At what stage, if any, do you think you might be able to quit your jobs and do this full time with a stable income? And would you like to do that eventually?
I quit
Yeah,
yesterday.
yeah, for sure. I would. It's the goal, but it seems kind of far off at this point. Um, just because kind of similar to what we talked about earlier. This is the thing that we do. It's not the side thing. So if,
Yeah,
somebody asks, "Hey, what do you do?" I run a podcast with my best friend, and the corporate thing is the thing that I do on the side to help ends meet. So
I see.
absolutely, as soon as it becomes possible, I would love to do Operation Red Pill full time. We would. At what stage? Just generally speaking, they say that if you're going to start your own business, that you should make twice as much as you would working for a company that offers 401k and health benefits and those types of things. So we're looking at Operation Red Pill, a single entity, doubling the income of two people, in the logistics world, on top of operational costs. So we're a little ways away from that, depending on growth. Because it honestly,
Christopher
what?
Adams said he knows a very successful multi-million. He knows
Yeah.
There
our
you
ways.
go. This is it. This
We right here,
we're gonna
man.
make it.
We one pitch away.
2024 is our year.
That's what I'm saying. We about to
I'll,
hit there, son.
I'll give you a little slice of the
That's
sponsorship
funny.
after I finish with it. No, I don't ask. I don't ask people for anything. Now, what are the absolute do's and don'ts for new podcast newbies to build a good show based on your experience?
I think that's a fabulous question. One of the things I would say people should do is try to put as much forethought into your show as you can, because you're rarely going to run into a situation where you thought too much. Now, there is a such thing as analysis paralysis, and yeah, you can overthink things, but you can kind of sense when you're getting into that stage of I'm having trouble making a decision. That's not necessarily what we mean. What we mean more by forethought is thinking through the various aspects of a show as far as you can, so that you prepare for those things and that you can have eventualities or protocols or things like that, so you don't find yourself out in the weeds without any sort of help. I think one of the other things you can do is study shows that move you and figure out why. What was it that you liked about that show? What was it that they did? Was it their production value? Was it their content? Was it their delivery? These types of things can be great blueprints, so that you don't have to recreate the wheel. Just understanding what makes that wheel work and replicating that if it works within your environment, I think it'd be a really good approach. What do you think, Christopher?
I would agree. I would say get yourself a Jason Spears.
Thanks, man, but
Because
you don't want that. People don't want that.
Merch.
it's funny though,
This
because
is the
you
merch. I'll go purchase one after the show.
Wait, what'd you say?
This is the merch.
Right.
But yeah, you mentioned forethought, and I went back. My mind flashed through all these conversations that we had. That I brought something up, and then you do your little sinister um, snicker, and I'm like, "Why are you laughing?" And you're like, "Well, we talked about this a couple of years ago," and I was like, "Yeah, but now that we're actually dealing with it, I might have different thoughts." So you've definitely been beneficial in kind of looking down the road and seeing, what hurdles or obstacles we could have to deal with.
Thanks, man.
You
I would
mentioned
say,
before. Oh, sorry, go on. Go on.
I was gonna say, for things that maybe things another thing to do, I would say, is pick something that you're really passionate about, because it's gonna have to push you through those hard hours, those long hard hours. If you're not doing something that you really like, you'll end up giving up. I mean, I think they say that the average podcast only goes about 7 or 8 episodes. And if you're going to push through that mark, it's got to be something you like doing. And for us, the number one thing would be allow God to guide you, because the show can take on a totally different tone if you partner up with God versus if you're just doing one on your own. Because some of the stuff that makes sense to us doesn't always pan out well downwind. And if you don't have that partner, then all you can do is what makes sense to you. But here's another thing. I would tell people, be very careful in the beginning stages of who you share your ideas with.
Yeah.
especially close family and friends, because they may not get the concept and idea that you got. And you really could be holding on to a really rocking idea. But if you're not careful, those people can end up talking you out of this fabulous idea that you've got that might not just change your life, but could change a whole bunch of other people's.
Interesting.
But those would be a couple dues. There's some don'ts that Christopher and I were talking about too. Like, don't try to appeal to everyone.
Yeah.
Find your niche and then just run in that space and stay in that lane. And I would say, don't be afraid to change or start over if something doesn't work. Like, keep that refining process going so that you get better and better. And then lastly, don't compare the value of your show to the production level of another. If you're not at a certain production level, it doesn't mean that your show doesn't have value, right? You got to be careful with that comparison. If you're going to compare, only compare to learn and make better. Don't compare to assess value or worth, because you can't really tell how valuable your show is to someone else just by your production value. There are some shows that don't have high production value, but who they talk to and what they say hits the heart of that audience so well that the audience doesn't care. They love the show. It's a great example of our show. Then you may have another one where you have really high production value, but it just doesn't say much and it doesn't really hit the audience. So you don't want to make the mistake of comparing the value of your show to the production level of another show.
Excellent information. Now, which episode are you most proud of and why?
I would say again, this Bloodlines of the Illuminati, the DuPonts episode. The Bloodlines of the Illuminati series by themselves have been really great. The amount of feedback and stuff that we've gotten, but this DuPont one that we're sitting on, the information, the ties, the hard work that's gone into it, but the stuff that we've uncovered, and it's a slightly premature to say that because we've yet to record the whole thing, but the product that we're sitting on, I think is really, really good. I think we keep stepping our game up with each one of these that we do.
Yeah,
That's an interesting question, man. I'm not sure how I would answer it. I feel like I feel like a prostitute when it comes to our shows, because I trade up like every time. I'm like, oh no, this is my favorite one. And then I get another one, I'm like, oh, this.
What's so
But
funny, like the Jaeger is not in sync right now because I thought that you were gonna say that you're like a parent and it's hard to find, pick one of your favorite children,
I
and
thought
you
about
said
that.
prostitute. I was like, it started with a P, but that's not the word I was thinking of.
Oh, that's hilarious. A lot of problems in life have started with that whole scenario,
Yeah, no doubt. No
right?
doubt.
It differs for me based on whatever, based on different criteria. Like, there was one episode that we did. I want to say it was Aleister Crowley. I think it was episode 56, which got taken down. Particularly because I did an edit in it where I included this song "Only Human."
Ah,
Bones. I'm Only Human, and it was a combination edit between. I think Christopher had made a statement like, you can't be mad at me because I'm just human. And I was like, oh, there's a song for that. We'll throw that in there. And so I threw in the song "I'm Only Human," and then right at the end of the stanza before you go in the chorus, it was like, "I'm only human after all." There's a guitar solo that I took from a whole other song, which was this guy on YouTube that does guitar covers. And he does these covers of these studio versions of these songs, and it matched perfectly. And I did the edit, I put the spacing in there so it came right in on the downbeat, and it starts out with this rip roaring guitar solo that's not in the original. And I was like, somebody needs to pay me. This needs to be how this song should have went. We should have had this guy as a featured guitarist on this song because this is dope. And then it got taken down.
so
I got
it got taken down because of the music censorship, not because of the content.
No, it got taken down because of music censorship. One of the things,
Right.
like, we started out on Anchor, and we're still on Anchor, but Anchor got bought by Spotify.
Yeah.
Before it was purchased by Spotify, Anchor had a advertising gimmick where if you went with Anchor, you got access to all of Spotify's music content that you could use without getting struck for royalty infringement, right?
Yeah.
No copyright infringement on it. So we said, cool. I mean, I'll pull a lot of music. You're a DJ, Adam. You know, you might think in musical terms, like everything's got a song for it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this is awesome. I went ahead and did that. And then Spotify bought Anchor and they changed the terms. And so now you can't use that type of music unless it is just for an uninterrupted segment. And then you have to talk after it. So if you were going to do like that song, I'm Only Human, it's got to be like the whole song. You can't cut it up. You can't edit. You can't do anything.
See,
And
okay.
so I'm like, okay, well, you guys didn't tell me that you changed the terms. And I got a lot of different tracks that we've, thrown into these episodes. And we got hit. Well, I think we got hit by Universal Music for copyright infringement. So I ended up taking that one down. And I haven't recut it without the music in there, which is something I need to do. But I love those edits. I love those moments where there's a joke inserted that makes me laugh. I like the moments where I'm listening to something and I don't expect this whole new thing to come in that comes in and draws my attention completely over. I think one edit we did, we were talking about this video game. I think we were talking about, what was the game? Medal of Honor. And I was going through like a rendition of what happened in the game that I remembered. And then in post-production, I went back and found video footage of somebody playing that exact level. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So then I took the audio from it and recut the audio to my narrative. And so as you're listening to, you remember that, Christopher?
That was dope. Oh yeah, that was dope. It
Right,
felt like you were completely immersed in that moment.
Exactly.
I remember that as well.
All the gunshots. I was like, oh, it's great. I want to play it right now. Like those moments I treasure because I remember the editing and then I'm like, they create these really special moments for me. So it's hard just to have one episode. But I can say there's probably a couple two really memorable ones that stick out. One is the one Christopher recommended that I hated, that has become one of our staples, and that is Cosmic Governments dealing with the tree Garden of Eden.
That was really good. Yeah,
was phenomenal, but it was one of the ones I argued the most against, and I was wrong. And I'm never admitting that again. So I'll get with Adam, Christopher. We will edit that part out. Never happened. We will redact that statement. One of the other episodes, though, is the one we did on Israel.
Yeah.
I think from a production value, that's probably one of the ones I'm most proud of because we did that in like 2 days. And typically it takes over a week for us to get a show together. And I remember being out on road at night. I called Christopher up. I'm like, hey, dude, there's something going on with Israel. I think we're going to have to talk about it because everybody's chatting about it. And he's like, yeah, I was thinking about it, but what are we going to talk about? And I was like, I don't know. I'm working. You're the one at home with the kids and the wife. You got free time.
Right.
Right. And I was like, hey, what can you put together? And he said, dude, actually, let me think about it. And he turned around a full mind-blowing episode in like a day and a half, maybe 2 days max. I think we recorded it in 2 days from the time that we pitched the idea, and it was insane. Like I stayed up all night and we released it like that following week. And it was incredible. And it actually is our highest rating episode.
Wow. So
what
do you use to edit? Are you using like, I know that Spotify for podcasters now has moved into this Riverside, and I'm actually looking into getting that because I'm just using Zoom and I'm not in the editing stages like you. So I wanted to pick your brains and maybe get into it. It's a little bit time consuming, but what is the program that you're using for editing?
We use GarageBand on Apple because it's free. It came with it. We were thinking about moving to Logic, which we may do in the future. But right now I've been using GarageBand and trying to make the most out of it that we can to keep costs low. And it's a pretty effective program for what we're doing. It's got a few limitations, but overall, I think it handles itself pretty well.
Okay, excellent. Now, this is the final question for this interview. What would you like to add to your show in the future, or how do you intend to keep improving it?
Lots of things actually. I'd like to see our merch store explode a little bit more, have a lot more content there. I really want us to get into video.
I thought that was going to be your first answer.
Well, yeah, I don't. There's just so many things. Definitely would like to get into video so that we could start putting stuff. You know, we can get shut down on YouTube. We can look forward to that happening. Uh, yeah, some different things there. I think way down in the future, Blurry Creatures. I know they do this thing called like BlurryCon, where they get some guests that have been on their show and stuff. And I think it would be so awesome to put together what is it, like a seminar or something like that, where we have
Mhm.
a couple other like-minded guests come on and we can all do like a live episode and meet and greet and actually kind of get past this remote uh, distance that we have with so many of our listeners and actually be able to engage one-on-one. I think that would be cool. So tons of room to grow. I don't know when those things will happen, but I think it would be fun.
That's pretty dope, man.
Is the Patriot thing a necessary step? Would you say? Because I haven't done that yet.
A Patreon,
Yeah.
I don't know if I would say that it's a necessary step. I think it depends on the show and the audience of what you have. It's cool to be able to have a platform that you can give extra content to listeners on. But I think one of the if you can manage to have your own platform, I would say do that as opposed to utilizing a third party platform like Patreon, only because there are costs involved with Patreon that you might be able to better translate into financial support if you're hosting your own spot. But for a startup, it's really not a bad place to go. Christopher and I actually got into it because a lot of other people were there. It is a little glitchy. They've been making improvements, which are good. They do listen to their audience. Um, so I don't want to deter anybody from looking into that, but I would say it's not at all a prerequisite for you to get into if you're starting out new. I would say the first thing is build the audience. And if you see you've got a place where you've really started to build your audience because you've got really good content, then maybe look at it that way. It does serve as a possible way to monetize some things. And that's important, especially if you don't have advertisers. Like one of the things Christopher and I decided on very early is that this will be an ad-free show.
Yeah.
So it is purely listener supported and supported by our dollars. So we do thank our employers because our employers are inadvertently supporting our show. But with the Patreon part, that helps to offset what you lose with ads, and you don't necessarily want ads because then you have somebody that can dictate what you can and can't say. For our space, that's really important. Maybe in your space or someone like that, it might not be as important, but Patreon does offer a way to give some monetary supplement to offset the cost that you pick up as a podcaster. So it
Yeah.
definitely has its place.
That's interesting you just said that because I've been following Joe Rogan for a long time and I feel like the more money he's accepting, he seems to be able to be really good at avoiding certain questions now. He just
You
dodges them.
think?
Yeah.
$75 million. They do
Yeah.
out free without some strings. He
I
found
know.
out right there in the middle of COVID. He said something and they snatched that mic quick. I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
you got that $75 million mic snatched, didn't you?" He
Well,
came back like, apparently I said some things yesterday that were inappropriate. I like to folks. I will do more research next time and get a counter opinion. I said, "Oh, that $75 million slap. It don't feel good. Do it."
Yeah, and the other thing worth mentioning is that there isn't actually a category on Spotify to have a conspiracy podcast. What do you advertise under? I'm like society or something. I
I
can't
think we're
remember.
culture society.
Yeah, I think I copied you. um, but like, why is that? I mean, the main is it the other sites now like Rumble and stuff. Can you can Google conspiracy and you get a list of all the conspiracy? I don't think you can, or can you?
I'm not sure. I haven't tried it on Rumble. I haven't actually looked.
That's interesting. So anyway, first of all, thank you for that amazing interview. This is again to celebrate over 100 episodes. I want to be your biggest fan. I think you've helped me develop a passion for podcasting. So what I want to offer to you now is a little gift. It's my first major presentation. What I've learned from you guys is to make notes, and this is my first script, let's say. I've perfected it all the way to last night. So I would appreciate a little bit of time, but I want you guys to jump in if there's something that you want to add. I feel like I'm going to nail this. I'm a little bit nervous, but let's see. Let's see what you think.
Adam, just before you go, because
Yeah.
I didn't want you to go through all of this, there's a little bit of static on your line.
A little static. Is that better?
Let's see. Hopefully, Christopher, were you hearing it, or was that just on my end?
Yeah, it sounds when you talk, it sounds crackly. So I don't know if it's like a connector to your mic or something like that.
Okay, I'll try it. Maybe because I'm moving around. All right, I'll try that. All right, so yeah, are you ready? Can I share a little story? It's a spiritual story as well, which will link back into what you guys do.
Sweet.
All right, so first of all, my dad was in the Navy, and he used to tell me that the moon landings were fake. So this is the reason why I found you. I was looking for a conspiracy podcast, but I was looking for much more than just deep diving. I needed answers. I needed some resolution. So this is the first experience I had a child, my dad in the Navy telling me that the moon landings were fake. And then of course I have to mention David Icke, get that out of the way. Back when David Icke came out when I was young, it was very dangerous to talk about these things. It was like bar fight talk. But I want to give credit to David Icke, even though I question some things, whether or what side he's on. He's the one that opened my mind, and it was the first care that I was sucked into this idea of reptilian domination, which kind of it ruined David Icke's career. But I think now there's more people starting swinging around to that idea that there's obviously, as you know, there's a worship for some kind of reptilians. So what I discovered was when people were quick to shut something down, I was the one taking my time to try and figure out why it needed shutting down in the first place. Yeah, that's what you guys do very well. It's like, okay, let's take a look into this. Let's see what we can find. So I started working for this bank in England, 1998. And in the bank, I was a call salesman. I was basically calling strangers and getting them to take loans over the phone. And they taught me in the bank manipulation techniques. And I was basically calling on behalf of a different affinity. Like, for example, I'd say I'm calling on behalf of your catalog, and I'm calling single mums with no money who want to be able to purchase things from the catalog to get their children. So I would say I'm calling from the catalog, which is illegal. And then actually I was giving them a loan through that affinity. And it ruined me, man. I felt guilty for what I was doing. I was giving people loans that I knew they wouldn't be able to pay back in the future. So that was this first thing I felt that there's something wrong with the world. These establishments are brainwashing people. And the day I left that job, I drove my dad's car home, and the wheel came off on the motorway, and I crashed into the hard shoulder. The car set on fire. I nearly died. And I don't know why. I felt like this because I'd left the company. I felt like they maybe try to silence me because I had all these little trade secrets. I don't know. It just seemed very weird the day I left that happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a near-death experience there, and very lucky that it was nighttime and there wasn't a lot of traffic. So anyway, when I was at the bank, a guy called David came up to me and he said, "Who built the pyramids of Egypt?" And I hadn't read a book since school. So talking about 18 now. As soon as I left school, I hadn't read a single book. And he said, who do you think built the pyramids? And I said, mate, I don't have time for that. I'm into clubs. I'm into girls, smoking weed and all that shit. And he gave me a copy of Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods. And I looked at it and I thought, I'm not going to read that. You know what? I basically I dropped smoking bongs and started learning about astronomy, geometry, fractional geometry, the chakras, physics, magic, etymology, and then the Kabbalah, which is basically like how to understand language in language. And it was all because of this book. And it was then that all my friends were like, "You crazy, man. You're like talking about the stars and shit." Nobody wanted to listen to me. And I was just like, dude, why is nobody asking questions about who did build the pyramids? So I couldn't answer the question. It took me 3 months to read that book. It was next to my bed. And I finally read it and I gave it back to the guy. And I was like, mate, I can't answer your question, but I'm going to go find out who did build the pyramids. And that's where I started with all this. Just to give you an example about, this Kabbalah, the idea of language in language, you guys were talking about the Ark of the Covenant in one of your last episodes. And I did a little comment like the tribe, who was the tribe that carried that? Can you remember?
Was it
tried
the
to carry
Levites that had to
the Ark.
carry it?
The Levites were the ones that were only allowed to.
It was the Levites. And of course, the Ark of the Covenant has been represented in this to be some kind of device that creates levitation. So that's the idea of the Kabbalah, the language in language. You've got the Levites and levitation. There's a connection there in language, and I see that now very, very, very well. I'm an English teacher as well, and synonyms and what do you call them? Hymonyms, all these sounds. I can see there's a connection to something much more ancient. So in '99, I moved to America and I was living with my uncle who used to work for Intel in Sacramento. He made a lot of money on the stock market. 1984, 85, when the stock market raised up, he was working for Intel and he was an analyst working on the notepad. Remember the notepads came out, everybody bought them. But these guys, they didn't have the trade secrets. They just knew what components were inside there, like the Dell. So they all invested the money in the stocks and they all made millions and millions. So my uncle was very much like, business focused, career focused. And I remember him saying, why are you wasting time reading those books? And I was reading Serpent in the Sky by John Anthony West, which was my first connection with this Egypt and this serpent idea, right? So what happened next is I came back from America. I loved my time there. I was based in Placerville on the West Coast. I moved to Spain after that. So because of this one book, I was bouncing around trying to find something. I wasn't settled where I was. I was looking for answers. I moved to Spain and I was living there for 6 months. My mum and dad came out to visit me. I was doing really well. And that night, my dad got really drunk and I took him in a bar. And I just remember there was a moment where my dad was just looking around in his surrounding. And I think he chose that place. And basically, he chugged down a whole bottle of vodka and passed out in this bar. And when we took him back to the hotel, he basically started sophisticate. Yeah, he was swallowing his vomit in his sleep, and it took us a while to get the doctor out. Blah blah blah. Anyway, he passed away the first night in Spain. I was 22. He was 52. So that made me become a man, and I had that first experience. Actually, somebody dying in my arms. Now I didn't get sad. I said, right, it's my duty now to take on where you left off. And all I can remember is these stories that he told me as a kid, like, don't believe the narrative. I didn't understand it until that point. So, of course, the year after that, 2001, was when 9/11 came out. And to be honest, I never questioned that. It wasn't so much later that I started seeing a lot of the evidence. I was like, dude, and that's when I really started like disconnecting from certain people. It was like, again, it was like the David Icke. It was danger talk. You can't say that. I mean, you can't be questioning that. It's like, why some people just don't want to look at the evidence? So I started looking at both sides of everything from that point. Anyway, after my dad died, I asked my mum, can you lend me some money? Because I want to be a DJ. I was 22 and it was very expensive. I needed like $5,000. My mum said, I don't have any money. She eventually did give me the money. And it was exactly 1 year after my dad died that I had my first ever DJ sound check. I took all my gear to a bar. I did a sound check. They said, okay, next week you get your first gig, paid gig. Exactly 1 year to the day my dad died. And the Wednesday before that gig, I just signed up for university. I was studying, I studied philosophy and film writing and creative writing, which I'll get into in a sec. But the Wednesday before the Thursday gig, I went out for the freshers ball and I had an arm wrestle with my best friend and I snapped my arm in half, spiral fracture. So I was in the hospital. Yeah, I was in the hospital. And this is when playing records. I've got like 100 kilos of equipment, in flight cases. And I was in the hospital and I said to my friend, shit, I got to do that gig tomorrow. How can I do a gig with my right arm? I need both hands to DJ. So my friends, like, they were like, dude, we're going to take you. You're going to do the damn gig. We're going to set everything up for you. And I did it. And everybody at university heard a story that there's this one-arm DJ in this bar. You got to come and see him. Not because he's a good DJ, because he looks like an octopus with one hand. So I smashed this gig, and it started everything. It was like, I believe it was my dad saying, "Hey, I've gave you the money, but I'm not going to give you a free pass. You have to work for this." So he took something away from me to make it more difficult, and it actually created my DJ career. Once I got my arm back, I was like, "Holy shit!" It was like, wow. So that's me learning how to DJ, and I started learning about how to manipulate energy in a room. This is really important to the story. So when I was at university, one of the modules that I had was I had to do a Shakespeare, and I remember I walked into this. I was like, "Oh my god!" I walked in a classroom. I was like, "I'm going to learn Shakespeare. This is going to be so dull." And I had this little lesbian professor. She looked like a shaven Ewok, if I could describe her. And, and I said, I was like, "God damn Shakespeare!" And she punched me on the back. This is my new professor. She punched me on the back. She said, "Listen, you little impotent man, I will teach you to love Shakespeare." And I tell you something, within 2 weeks, I was going around to her house, the university, having dinner with her other partner, who was also lesbian, of course. And these two were professors of Shakespeare. And they taught me, they would go through a Shakespeare play and show me 12 different variations of every play. It's where I learned about esoteric information. It's where I learned about John Doe, the connection of John Doe and Francis Bacon. And of course, this name, Will I Am, which you see pops up in pop culture all the time, right? And it's where I learned ultimately what ambiguity is. And I started looking at art, I started looking at text, cryptology, all these symbols started coming out. And I was just like, this guy is either the greatest writer in the world, or he's trying to tell the future about what's really going down in the past. So just for an example, for those that don't know Shakespeare, Queen Elizabeth would sit in the audience and listen to him doing his plays. And if anybody was outspoken, they used to have what was called a mosh pit at the front of the opera house, and that's where all the cannon fodder would be. If anybody said anything like outspoken, she used to love saying "off with his head," and they'd just pull somebody out and chop their head off. So what Shakespeare had to do is he had to be very, very careful about how he would word things, so that somebody would say, "Oh, he's saying this," but then somebody else would say, "No, I didn't get that. I got a completely different version." So this got me into really powerful esoteric style of learning symbolism and ancient knowledge. So at this point, I finally got to go to Egypt. I've been studying Egypt ever since the book Graham Hancock. I had this urge to go there. So I DJ'd, saved up a ton of money, and I took my niece there for a holiday when she was 14. And it was a very surreal experience. Have you guys been to Egypt yet?
No.
No, I have not.
For me, I've been to 79 countries, and Egypt's the place you got to go. It is absolutely mind-blowing. So I went there with all this information, but I just want to make sure, reading books like Fingerprints of the Gods, I was very careful to go out and find other books that were arguing the opposite. I think that's really important, is not to lean down one side, is to look at other people's opinions and find what resonates well with you. So I got to go to the pyramids, and I went inside the pyramid to the Grand Chamber. And as a DJ, I felt the energy from this place like nothing else. A lot of the photographs that I took in all these ancient temples, they had all these like particles on there, and I thought they were sand. And I thought it was just back when the 1K camera or whatever. I thought they were sand particles, but actually that's the energy in the area that's been picked up by the photographs. You see this around, so there's 100% energy still being pulled from these structures. So when I was climbing through the pyramid, I was like, this is obviously not made for man to climb through the pyramid. And this is when I started saying, this narrative, this idea that this is a tomb, there's no way this was built as a tomb. This is some kind of energy device. And I could feel the energy the deeper I went into the pyramid. And I don't know if you know this, but in the Grand Chamber, when you go in there, they say no flash photography. But I took a bunch of pictures, And inside the grand chamber, you've got this, what's like a sarcophagus with the lid that's missing. Now, the basic fact is the tunnel that connects the grand chamber into the king chamber, there's no way that sarcophagus would fit through that tunnel. So they built this whole granite structure from the inside out. And they say that the Ark of the Covenant was the device that sat inside the grand chamber. And it's obvious when you look at the walls of the grand chamber that there was some kind of implosion, because you can see the burn marks. You can see where they've tried to wash the granite down. But if you go around all the other sites in Egypt, there are temples that you see there's been an implosion from the outside, which has knocked the foundation of the wall from the outside. So it shows that all these were connected and something happened. Maybe that something overheated or it was like an atomic explosion. But I think that's why they moved the ark from there to wherever it is now. So this ark was some kind of power generator powering this this complex, right? Now, what are the pyramids? In my opinion, based off Christopher Dunn's amazing work, which I'll mention in a minute, it's they are coupled oscillators. As above, so below. So whatever's going on above is going on below, which is where you get the Masonic thing. But the best way to describe an oscillator would be like the moon and the earth. So this thing is powering something, or it's transmitting to somewhere else, right? Now I was asked if I wanted to climb the pyramid, and I nearly did, but I bailed out. And the guy
climb on the outside.
Yeah, so it's a funny story. I went to a perfume shop with my tour guide, and I was like, tour guide's talking the whole full, tourist narrative. And I was like, dude, I've read all these books. These things that you say are like a vase in the museum. It's not a vase. It's like a spinning disc, which was obviously used for some kind of levitation technology. For me, I was seeing Egypt in a whole different ball game. So we went to this perfume shop, and the guy I was with my 14-year-old niece. And he made a joke saying, "Oh, if you put this perfume on your girlfriend's pyramid, it will make her very horny." And I was like, "Dude, that's my niece." So he was super embarrassed. Anyway, I have a tattoo. I don't know if you can see it. I have a tattoo on my arm, which I actually got from Robert Baval's book, The Orion Mystery, and that's where I discovered this idea of the duat, the duality, which is like when you died in Egypt, you would go through this transition from this life through the duat into another world, and they call it the underworld. So the guy in the shop saw that I was wearing hieroglyphs on my arm, and he was like, "Hey, you want to go climb the pyramid?" I was like, "Yeah. How do I do that?" So he's like, "I have a father in the army. Pay me $100 and we'll do it tonight." So I told my niece at the hotel, "I'm going to do this." And while I was telling her, some guy overheard me in the restaurant, and he started mithering me, saying, "I want to do the same thing." The guy specifically told me not to tell anybody. So when the guy came to pick me up, this guy was behind me. Hey, I want to come with you. I want to come with you. So I told the guy, "Look, I don't feel comfortable doing the climb." And he says, "Don't worry. I have a different idea. I'm going to go and take you to meet a special person." So he took me in a car in Cairo, total random. He took me to meet a guy called Hakim. And Hakim means the wise one, right? And this guy, Hakim, I walked into his house, and I've met a couple of people in my life that seem to levitate when they walk in a room. They're wearing like a robe. It's almost like they don't touch the ground. And he come into the room like this, and I felt something in my stomach. And he said to me immediately, I never said anything about my father, but he said that my father was there with me, and it made me, I sort of puked up a little bit. I was sick, and I didn't know what to do with the vomit. So I sort of like spat it on the floor, and then he made me sit down. And I was conscious that I had been sat in my own little bit sick. Anyway, this guy was talking to me, and at the time, there was no way that I would possibly understand the message that he was giving me. He was giving me a giant code. And his house was right in front. You could see the Sphinx from his balcony. It was beautiful. Just a simple house. And he told me that at the time, before I left Egypt, my mum was in hospital, and also the war had broke out. And I was told not to go to Egypt because of the war. And my mum said, "You're going, no matter what." And my mum was in hospital. She was suffering from cancer. And I was worried that I wouldn't get back and she might die while I was away, but she was adamant. She's like, "You're going to Egypt. I know how much you've worked. You said you were going to DJ. You saved the money. You're going." So I went over there, and I told my sister, "If something happens, Don't let me know. I'll figure it out when I get home. Anyway, without saying a single word to this guy, and I never mentioned anything to the other guy in the shop, he says to me, "Your mum is sick. I'm going to send her some energy, and that's what the Sphinx is for. It's an energy device." And I was like, "How do you know this? This is like one of those magic tricks on TV." This is where I started thinking magic's real, or maybe I wanted to hear that because obviously I was so worried about my mum. Anyway, what I learned about this guy Hakim was that he's actually an Ammonite, and these are ancient Semitic people. They are the sons of Ammon, Ammon, and he's basically a wisdom keeper of ancient oral traditions that are passed down through the women in the family all these centuries, right? Now, at the time, I know you're a massive fan of Thundercats, Jason, and
Mhm.
I don't know if you've heard this before, but the Sphinx to me is a baby lion, Babylon. That's where I think it comes from, or it's related to that in some way. And if you watch the Thundercats, it's kind of like there might be some truth in that cartoon, as there is with so many of the cartoons we watched in the early days. So what Hakim taught me was that Egypt used to be called Kemet, the land of the black fertile soil, and that's where we get alchemy and chemistry. And the original builder of this, the original architect, I don't know if you've heard this before, his name is Ammon. And that's where in most religions, people say Amen, because he's solidified his legendary status all this time. His name is Ammon, and everybody says Amen to worship this original builder. And he was in the golden era, and he knew how to use the sun to harness free energy. So his name was Amun Ra, and that's what Ra is the sun disk, right? And if you look at ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, you'll see some of the gods wearing this sun disk above their head. So what happened in the golden era, as with every empire, there's going to be people who get jealous and they'll come in and they want to take out the power, or whoever's like the golden balls, they want to remove that with some jealous, wicked new philosophy or new religion. And he basically got kicked out of the land of Kemet. So what he wanted to do to preserve his name, he wanted to create a shield around his name. And over time, the word shield in ancient Kemet is Kam. So the people turned his name from Amun Ra into Ra Kam, the Ra shield. And that's where you get the Rothschild from. Did you know that?
No.
So
Interesting.
that's where you get the Rothschild, the Roth shield, the Ra shield. So they've had power since the beginning of this takeover, right? So anyway, the Sun Shield was the free energy. This is some kind of energy device. Now, according to Graham Hancock and all that, and that guy Flint kind of argued this point of view that Leo, when when the Sphinx was facing Leo, when it was in the sight, the direct sight of Leo. If you wind back a star chart, Leo, the constellation, would have been in front of the Sphinx around 11,500 BC. So what Graham Hancock is saying is that if there is a species or whatever that came to this planet or built this planet, like the Babylonians or whatever, they built this energy device pointing at their point of origin where they've come from, possibly to communicate with them, right? And I'll get into that in a minute. But what's interesting, I'm sure you guys have read the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Babylonians used to call Leo constellation Urgula, Urgula, and in the Epic of Gilgamesh you have Ursula, which I find again, if you talk about the play on words and how sounds can change. And what is the beast in Gilgamesh? He's like a shape-shifting beast, like a werewolf kind of thing, right? So anyway, while I was in Egypt I had one day after I'd met Hakeem, just to chill around the pool. I went to this Nina House Hotel because this is where I heard the likes of John Anthony West, Surf It in the Sky, all these famous writers, Graham Hancock. I heard this is where they stay because you have a pyramid view. And I was around the swimming pool just killing a couple of hours before I was flying to Luxor, and I saw a familiar face around the pool. So I've gone running up to this guy, as I would do with you guys. And I was like, "You're Robert Baval, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Mate, I've just met the guy whose book I've had a tattoo on." and I'm in Egypt because I've read your book. And he was sat around the fucking pool, and you know, very interesting. We stayed in contact, and I told him about this.
Okay.
I told him about this encounter I'd had with Hakeem. Now he's like, "Oh, this guy Hakeem is a legend. How did you find him? Where does he live?" And I said, "I don't know. I just went to this random perfume shop and the guy took me there. I couldn't give you directions." But up until that point, Hakeem had never met Robert Bivall or Graham Hancock. In fact, a lot of what Hakeem was saying, they were saying something opposite. So I was kind of like, "Yeah, you need to speak to that guy." Now, I had to leave Hakeem. I stayed with him for 3 hours and he was talking to me about stuff that I couldn't possibly process. It took me all my time to get that download correct. And then my niece called me from the hotel. She was freaking out, saying the guy that wanted to climb the pyramid was knocking on the door. So I was like, Hakeem, I gotta go. And I swear to God, you remember when Gandalf gets angry in Lord of the Rings and he's like, "Rah!" That's what Hakeem looked. It's what Hakeem looked like to me. He was very angry that I had to leave. So I was like, "Dude, please, can you take me home?" And the guy took me home. And I was like, "I hope I didn't fuck that up." He's like, "No, mate. You'll figure out what that experience is later on." So anyway, I just remember getting home and I checked my pants because I remember I said I was sick. There was no puke on my pants. It was completely clean, which I found very like a little tiny detail. And he told me the last thing he said to me, I've sent your mum some energy and she will know, right? So I'm in Egypt. I get home. It's the Friday night. As soon as I get home, I drop my niece off. My sister says, "Mum's really sick. She's not going to last much longer. You need to go to the hospital." So I shoot to the hospital. I've got this Egyptian cartouche that I bought. It's just a cheap silver thing. And as soon as I walked in the hospital, the nurse was like, "Oh, you must be Adam. Your mum's been waiting for you. She won't die until she's had a hug." I was like, "Oh my God." And I put this chain around my mum's neck and we had the conversation and she was like, "I'm so proud of you. I'm so glad you had a good time in Egypt." And I put the chain around her and then I went home to pick up my stuff and then I was going to go and stay at the hospital. When she woke up in the morning, the nurse called me. She's like, "Adam, your mum's freaking out." She said something's burning around her neck. I was like, "That's just the chain." And don't forget, she's heavily morphine now. So she shouldn't feel a single thing, but she could feel this chain burning, right? And anyway, on the Monday, all the family got together. My mum was very sick. It was like any time. She wasn't responding to anything. No word of a lie. This is where the magic kicks in now. My mum sat up on the bed just like the exorcist. And she looked me straight in the eyes in front of everybody. And she said, and she just looked at me and Hakeem just came out and said, "She will know." And I was like, and then she lay back down and I was pressing the button to get the nurse to come over. And I explained to her, "Mum's just sat up. Maybe there's hope." She's like, "There's no way your mum could have sat up with the amount of morphine she's on." And there was me and the family all said that she did. So that's when I knew whatever Hakeem had done, he gave me just enough time to get home and be with my mum before she passed away. And then when she did pass away, I took the chain and I wore that. It became my trinket. And I felt like I had a soul in there, right? So because of all this, I lost my parents within 3 years. I was 25. I had to do my final year of my degree. I didn't get to finish my degree. I'd done 3 years of a 4-year degree. Couldn't finish the final because I had to go back to full-time work to help to pay for the house that I was living in. But you see, what I realized now is that I didn't need to finish my degree because I'd been given a masterclass instead by Hakeem, and I just didn't know it yet, right? So I became obsessed with the pyramids and trying to understand this energy. I became obsessed with this magic that if there's an old like way to send energy around from the golden era, I want to know how to reconnect that again, right? And be able to give that to other people in need. So I didn't get Hakeem's contact in Egypt, and I lost contact with everything. And I tried to find him on Google, but back then Google was really limited. So one day I'm just randomly watching the Discovery Channel, and I see Robert Bivall on TV, and I was like, "Oh, he's my friend." And then there's another clip with Hakeem, not in the same clip, but he's in the same program, and it was the Pyramid Code. If you haven't seen that on YouTube, highly recommend. 4-part series, incredible. And here's Hakeem wearing his little hat. Up until that point, I thought he was like a figment of my imagination or something. And I was like, "That's the guy from Egypt. He's real." And he's finally like found Robert Bivall. So they finally connected their ideas, right? Anyway, it turns out I found out of Robert Baval, they never actually met. They were just in the same TV program. But I was like, finally, the world is going to discover this guy, Hakeem. He's probably the last of this Ammonite tribe that had the balls to come out and say, I need to get this information out before it gets lost. So they never used to write anything down. It was all done by symbolism and structures and geology, right? So this affected me so much that I sold my family house. And then I went traveling around the world for 3 years alone, DJing, so that my parents could see the world through my eyes. And I wanted to become the truest version of me by stepping out of the matrix for a little bit and just seeing the world for what it is. So as I traveled, every single place that I went, all these ancient temples, like the Mayan temples, every single place, all resonated at the same frequency for me. And I cared so much about these ancient sites, more than clubs, more than the girls. But I found that when I went to these ancient spaces, it was much easier for me to pick up a girl later because I felt calmer, right? So I started experiencing life outside the matrix. I met a shaman. I took some DMT and peyote, and I had this feeling that I could move around in space. I could go and sit with you in your living room, and then I could jump over and sit with Christopher in another living room. We could have a real experience, like without physically being there. So I felt like I suspended the density of the human body and allowed the mind to come out, right? But like you said before, you have to have like a religious structure. I also needed a structure around me, otherwise you'll never come back. So I was telling a friend a story in Vietnam about this Hakeem. And of course, I give up hope trying to find him. And my friend, I'm still old school. I forget that you can just Google things. He Googles Hakeem and he finds an online school now of chematology, which is what Hakeem was teaching. And there's the picture of Hakeem. And then I found out Hakeem had passed away. So I was like, wow, I always just wanted to say to that guy, thank you for whatever you did in Egypt. Thank you for opening my eyes and making me think about this energy device. And then whatever you did just to give me enough time for my mom. So that's when all the synchronization started happening for me, like massive synchronization. I suddenly became much more focused and in thought and in purpose, which is what I appreciate your show so much. And all this information that Hakeem had explained to me all started to download and decode, but I needed to fill the missing parts. So basically, Hakeem had implanted a secret treasure in my own brain, right? So through this website, Chematology, I discovered a guy called Stephen Melher, who was the only student of Hakeem. He spent years in Egypt. It turns out this guy's a Rosicrucian. He worked for the Rosicrucians for a while, which, I'm always a little bit like, are they secret spies? Anyway, this guy wrote this book called Land of Osiris by Stephen Melher, Mehler. I have spoke to Stephen online. I'm trying to get him on the podcast, but he's a bit funny about doing interviews these days. But anyway, Land of Osiris, first book, that was the one that helped describe the function of the pyramids, which was taken from Christopher Dunn, his book. For anybody that's not read Christopher Dunn, he's a magnificent person. He's done the book called The Giza Power Plant and the Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. He's telling that from a Masonic point of view, from an engineering point of view, about, for example, how perfect the Egyptians were able to create a statue, both sides of the face equally proportional, which you can only do with advanced technology. You cannot do that chipping a sculpture, if you know what I mean. So this was the first book where I found the missing piece about the function of the pyramid. And it was like, oh, I can't meet Hakeem in it ever again. But through Stephen, I can get all the missing pieces of the oral tradition that he downloaded to me. So yeah, that book talks about the function of the pyramids, which I won't go into in this episode. I have an episode on my own podcast it's just called The Pyramids Explained. But then the second book that Stephen Melher wrote is called From Light into Darkness. And it's the first time I'd come across this King Akhenaten, right? And the name Aten, you've got Akhenaten, you've got Atom, you've got Adam. Adam. I think Adam comes from Atom. And this guy, Akhenaten, he's the real Moses. I can't say that for sure, but the story of Moses is the story of Akhenaten, and he's got connections to the Exodus, Judaism, and he's the one that the Rosicrucian order they celebrate the most, and he's the guy that I think, I'm not sure if this is true, but apparently he was the first person to say that we were all God. He had this new like theosophy, whatever, that we were all God, and some people didn't like that. They wanted a control dominatrix. They wanted somebody that everybody would just focus on rather than, oh yeah, we're all God. We can do whatever we want. We can have this golden era. So Akhenaten is also the father of Tutankhamun. And what a lot of people don't know is that Tutankhamun was a mutant. He was a failed offspring. He had a cleft lip. He had a crooked back and a club foot. He was like Frankenstein's monster. And I find that very interesting because also Akhenaten has got the cone head, right? Having just watched National Treasure the other day again, I know you guys are going to rewatch that. There's a scene at the end when they find the treasure, and there's a statue, an Egyptian statue that's blue, and he has a beard. And the guy says, "Oh, look at that! It's a blue guy with a beard," and he said it must be of some importance, the beard. And I think the beard maybe represents the goat. And maybe that's a statue of Akhenaten, and goat means greatest of all time, right? So he's the guy that started the first ever mystery schools. And this is apparent because the Masons and the Rosicrucians still worship Akhenaten, right? What I think Akhenaten is, if I went back and, because of you, Jason, because of this arc, I went back and watched the whole Predator and Alien all in order. And it's interesting because the Predators come down, the playgrounds are the pyramids, they're eating people for food. And then you obviously got the heads, which look like these people from Egypt. The same would go for the Klingons in Star Trek. And what happens in Star Trek? I know Christopher watches it. I'm still making my way through. This is because of you again, Jason. I have to watch the whole Star Trek. It's taking me 3 fucking years. I'm on Deep Space Nine, and to be honest, a lot of it's just garbage. But my friend said to me, if you study Star Trek, it's better than the Bible. There's obviously references to the Bible. There's references to the original story. And in Star Trek, the Klingons have like a mutant child with a human. So I think that's what Jesus was. When you look at the old movies of like, Jesus in the stable and there's the light shining down, I think that's actually a UFO. And I think rather than there being a boat that Moses had, Noah's Ark, I think that could have been just a UFO with a bunch of DNA samples in there. That would make a lot more sense than trying to carry all the animals, right? So somebody has the power, like Enki or whatever, they have the power to restart civilization again. But the problem is, let's say you're from another planet, you need to climatize to this, whatever the new world is. Like when you terraform a planet, you need to climatize to that. So I think Akhenaten's come down. He's got no physical female partner, which I think where transhumanism might come into this later, but they have to figure out how to genetically modify a child, which was what Tutankhamun was. And ever since then, that whole bloodline was just a mutant thing to try and perfect the exchange from being a non-human, maybe a demigod, into a human that can survive. And why? Because we're the ones that have to do all the labor on this planet to extract all the minerals that they need for their stuff, right? That's why we're mining all the time. And that's why we're destroying our planet, because their planet's been destroyed. Maybe Mars, let's say, I'll get into that in a sec, but maybe Mars was just like planet Earth. We mined the shit out of it and they had to migrate over to here. Now we mine the shit out of this planet while we're waiting for that to re-terraform, right? So I believe that these entities could have been from another planet. People say the Draco or whatever, but if they're from a planet like Mars, they would have been susceptible to higher intense heat. Their bodies would have been denser, and they might have been more powerful than us, which is like the story of Superman and all that, right? Which we'll get into in a second. So anyway, I was doing all this research on the pyramids. I discovered a really awesome documentary. If you haven't seen it, it's called The Revelation of the Pyramids. It was on YouTube. It's phenomenal. It's since been taken off YouTube because it got so much traction. And as you see now, what's going on in today's era, these really good documentaries are being redone and put on Netflix, but the real good content's been taken out, right? Which is sad. It's like subliminal censorship. So while I'm looking at this thing, I found a little YouTube video and it had a connection with Nikola Tesla to the pyramids. So I had to look into Nikola Tesla. And I was like, who is Nikola Tesla? Why did I never get taught this at school? Why does nobody talk about this guy? So Tesla was born 1856 and he died in 1943. Now, there's a really good book. It's called Tesla, the Wizard, The Life and Times by a guy called Mark Cypher. Now, the wizard to me sounds very similar to lizard. You can't not connect those two things. And Mark Cypher was apparently, he had family ties to Tesla. So he wrote this wonderful book. You can download it as an audiobook as well. But he also did a 4-part series on History Channel called The Tesla Files. Highly recommended. And in this book, there's a couple of references. He mentioned that Nikola Tesla had a funny diet and he could eat steaks, like incredible amount of meat. But what caught my eye was he said that he had teeth, funny shaped teeth. His teeth actually resemble what's called an adze tool, which is like a hammer. I don't know why they detailed it like that, but it was like, so he's got fangs basically, and he's a big, tall guy, and he's got a funny diet, and he's into electricity, and he knows all this stuff, like superhuman stuff that nobody else seems to understand. So then there was a couple of new connections where in the book, it mentioned that, have you ever read Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged?
Heard of it, haven't read it.
It's a tough book. So in Ayn Rand, yeah, you know, I'm not going to get into the politics of Ayn Rand, but in Ayn Rand, it opens with this line, who is John Galt? And John Galt is this like mystery golden balls who has all this secret information about a mysterious steel that's not from this earth. And this steel is what they ultimately build the railroads with. And I think this is where, so John Galt is this mysterious man. And Mark Cypher in the book says Tesla was referenced in a couple of things, one being that John Galt is Nikola Tesla. So I would recommend that you go and watch this Atlas Shrugged. I think this 2-part movie. It's a bit of a B movie. It's rated like 5 on IMDb. But something I found, and I'm a huge movie buff like you, the lower the ratings on IMDb, those are the movies that you want to be checking out more because there's so much information in there, right? So that's definitely a movie to watch. In the movie Atlas Shrugged, you've got basically this John Galt who has a secret underworld that's hidden by like a hologram. And that's where all these people go to live to escape the Matrix. So it's almost like if Tesla was still alive, there could be this elite or this rebel alliance that are living a completely different life, like the Shambhala theory. So what did Tesla say? Tesla said, if you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. Now, another reference from the book was that David Bowie played this alien in the really cool movie called The Man Who Fell to Earth. I don't know if you've seen that, but it's another great film. I'm just dropping bombs here because I know when you drop bombs, I'm always making notes like, I'm gonna watch that. So David Bowie played The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. He plays a guy called Thomas Newton. And basically, he's a man that falls to Earth and he wants to get back home again. And it shows his alien world where they live on a monorail, like a train. It's completely desert. And his wife and his child are waiting for him to return home. But he needs to find the technology to build to be able to get back home again, which is like the story of E.T., basically. So interesting that Bowie played this guy. And there's a scene where Bowie pulls his mask off. And Bowie plays a very successful businessman because he obviously has secrets from another planet that are more advanced than this, which is where the John Galt also connects. So just a deep dive on David Bowie. Remember, David Bowie's very unique. He has that one eye, that colored eye, right? David Bowie was born in 1947. Now, interestingly, I've been putting a timeline together of history, and every time somebody important dies, somebody of greater influence comes along within a close proximity. So Bowie died in 43. Sorry, Tesla dies in 43 and Bowie comes around in 1947. I find that quite intriguing. I find that there's a connection somehow there, like jumping the vessel, let's say. The first movie or small video that David Bowie brought out was called The Image. And it's about an artist painting that comes to life and haunts him, which I find very interesting. And then Bowie's first ever music video was in 1969, bit of numerology there. It was called Space Oddity, Then he brought out another song called The Virgin Soldiers, which is kind of weird. You know, you come from another planet, you might be the first soldiers. That was in 69. 1973, he did a couple of tracks, Life on Mars and Ziggy Stardust. And then in 1982, he did a movie called Baal, Baal. It's very, very strange, right? Then 1983, he did a movie called The Hunger, which is a very good vampire film. And I just want to mention another vampire film called The Lair of the White Worm, 1988. In that film, there's a reference to Marcus Aurelius. There's a statue of him in a vampire's house. And I finally was like, why are the vampires worshiping Marcus Aurelius? And, you know, I've read his meditations, and it's like a life manual, that book, for the right kind of tribe who want to learn how to adapt to a new terrain. I found that almost like an astronaut journaling a new planet rather than a Roman emperor, you know, who was talking about forgiveness. So the David Bowie link again, there's another film called Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. Again, all these you should check out. At the end of that film, they bury David Bowie in sand and leave him to die outside with his head exposed to the sun. But right before that, they take a big chunk with some scissors of his beautiful blonde hair. Now I'll ask you, Christopher, what do you think the reason you would take a chunk of somebody's hair out?
For DNA would be my first thought.
Exactly. And the movie finishes that way, right? Now, if you remember Albert Pike, Captain Pike, he's the original guy from Star Trek before Captain Kirk. Who's Albert Pike? You know very well who that is. In Star Trek, when Captain Pike's old, he's also got really blonde hair. Who else has really blonde hair? Flash Gordon, and he's going to save every one of us. And then you also have The Little Prince. That book, which all the kids read, is about a little guy with blonde hair, right? And I'll get to that in a second. I just want to finish this little run. Bowie did another track called Loving the Alien, 1985. Then, of course, he did Labyrinth, which was really trippy. We all remember that, 1986. He did The Last Temptation of Christ in 1988. He was in Twin Peaks, hugely esoteric stuff in that. And then, of course, Bowie plays Nikola Tesla again in The Prestige in 2006. And remember what happened in The Prestige? They had this device and it ended up replicating whoever went in it, right? Now, I found that very interesting. I find that this is them sort of bringing out the story of Star Trek, transportation, all that kind of stuff. We've had this technology forever. It's all about getting the genetics right. So if you're doing the same thing with like Tutankhamun and he keeps coming out a mutant, you're going to keep trying, you're going to keep trying, you're going to keep experimenting with new things. So you got Twin Peaks. And then the last song Bowie ever made in 2016 before he died is called Last Time I Can't Give Everything Away. Just those things in the titles to me is a message from something, right? So in Mark Cypher's book, again, as I mentioned, he mentioned that Tesla was actually this John Galt. Who is John Galt? He's this mystery golden balls in Atlas Shrugged. He's a man who seems to have a secret metal for railroads that nobody else can match. And in The Man Who Fell to Earth, the movie, there is also a futuristic monorail on the aliens' planet. And basically, we're now talking about special steel, the Man of Steel, right? We're going to get into the Superman shit now. So the cube.
Okay, hang on. Let me slow you down a little bit because it's a little bit hard to track. You're covering a bunch of material. Yeah. So, are you suggesting that Nikola Tesla was a vampire? Is that what you're hinting to? Or
I'm hinting to a Nephilim connection. Yes, we'll get to that. But there could be a vampire connection. Yeah. I actually, if you look at the older pictures of Nikola Tesla, he does look a little bit like the original Dracula. Very, very thin and pale. Okay, yeah, I know there's a lot of stuff, but I'll try to be as simple as I can. So, talking about this special steel, there's a famous cube, the Alamo, at the Astor in New York, and they say that this is a special metal, not from this planet. There's a bunch of these cubes actually all around the world, and they're classed as art. But I think that this could be, I've never been to the cube and never touched it or whatever, but you know, it's like that thing that spins around. Apparently this is, it's been weathered from years or whatever. But somebody I spoke to, somebody I listened to, said that this could be a cube from outer space, and this is actually our first contact with another life form. And I found that interesting when you think about Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick. It's almost like we've got to cue the brick, cue this like alien life form to live on planet Earth. That again, that's just a little bit out there. So, okay, that's the end of the run of Bowie. What I want to talk about now, Peerless. There's a company called Peerless Motor Cars, and they were based 1900s to 1931. American company, if I recall. And if you Google Peerless Motors, Peerless, you'll find some vintage posters of Peerless Motors. And if you look at them, a bunch of them, you'll see old posters showing beams of light coming from a tower to a car. It's fascinating, right? Now, there's a movie called The Secret of Nikola Tesla, 1980, which features Orson Welles. That new movie that recently came out with Tesla. Now, again, if you Google Nikola Tesla film, you're going to get that new one, and it's a bunch of crap. But try to find the 1980 version with Orson Welles, and you'll see at the end of that film, he's got a bunch of pictures from Nikola Tesla's artwork showing crafts, showing planes, and they have this beam of light from a tower, which is showing its remote. It's being powered by some kind of energy device, right? And I have a friend who's worked, I know Jason's big into aviation. My friend swears to me that he's worked in airports. I can't confirm this, but he says he doesn't think planes have fuel in them, that they're actually powered from something else, like a separate grid. So, okay, now talking about all of that, it was at this time that I came across Tesla cars, and I was like, hang on, okay, Nikola Tesla cars. I just didn't put the two together. So then around that time is when I got into Joe Rogan, and Elon Musk was on there. It was one of the first things I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is like an audio book, but I can learn from other people. So at that in the interview, Rogan's interviewing Musk, and Musk says he's just bought Gene Wilder's house. So I've got to be like, okay, why Gene Wilder? Now, Gene Wilder, this is where I'm going to do my Gene Wilder run. Gene Wilder's born in 1933. What's the significance of 33 to you guys? Jason?
Straight occult. I mean, 33's got a lot of significance behind it, whether you're dealing with the fallen angels, it's got a lot of esoteric significance to it. Pretty much going back to the fallen angels, the occult, and the system of evil that was established on Mount Hermon.
Right. So also Jesus died 33 years old, and 33 is the 33rd degree Freemasonry. So in a way, metaphorically, you could say that what Jesus learned were all the steps for Masons to learn to get to the 33rd degree. I'm not sure about that, but it's when you start.
This is where we got to push back just a little bit, because you've done a really your experience is phenomenal. Being able to travel everywhere that you've gone, it's an amazing story. It seems though that your that what you've experienced is really what we talk about on our show as the satanic control matrix. Like, you've made all of the connections from Egypt, from these ancient gods to ancient technologies, to the need to experiment genetically, and moving it all the way up to the modern day influences of David Bowie and Tesla and all of that. I'm a little bit confused though on which side of it you stand.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm definitely on the side of light, not on the darkness. Okay, that's good. Let me just finish this run on Gene Wilder, why I brought him up. Gene Wilder's history is a bit shady. There's not so much family history, but I found out that his mum was called Jean Bauer, Baer Silberman, and his dad's William, another Will.i.am Silberman. And when you say those words fast, Silberman, it almost sounds like Superman. I know that's, again, I'm just playing on words, but I have this connection with the story of Superman to the connection of Nikola Tesla. Now, one of the first movies that Gene Wilder was in was Bonnie and Clyde. And when I hear that, you did a story about the Jekyll and Hyde, the Jekyll Island. Bonnie and Clyde sounds a little bit like Jekyll and Hyde, and there's that meeting on Jekyll Island. But that movie, Bonnie and Clyde, was directed by a guy called Eugene Grizzard, which, again, these names correlate to lizard, whatever. You've got Eugene, genetics. That anywhere you see a Eugene, genetics is involved. So after this, the first ever major role for Gene Wilder, his name was Leo Bloom, and he was in The Producers, which was by Mel Brooks. And that, I don't know if you've seen that, it's an amazing film, but that Producers is about these guys that want to do a play about Nazi Germany. And rather than sell tickets, what they do is they pre-sell tickets, and they want to bomb the show so that everybody's paid for it up front, and then they won't go to the show, right? But actually, everybody loves the show so much that they keep coming back. So their manipulation fails. But what you've got here is you've got a guy creating The Producers, and Gene Wilder's name was Leo Bloom, and Leo Bloom comes from James Joyce's Ulysses, right? And I don't know if you remember Ulysses 31, the cartoon. I'm sure Jason remembers this.
I haven't heard of her.
Yeah, Ulysses 31. Ulysses, a great. It was a bit like Thundercats. So in that, if you look at Ulysses 31, the logo, you've got 3S, like the SS. You got that inside the logo, and you've got blue skin people. You've got the giant all-seeing eye. You've got Thundercats helmets. You've got basically astronauts from another planet, and you've got a little blonde-haired kid wearing the same ring like Julius Caesar, which looks like the Little Prince, right? So I'll get to that in a sec. What came after that? You had Willy Wonka in 1971. And what did we see in that film? You saw a body being transported. You saw like experiments on humans. You got magic mushrooms in the background. It was a very strange thing to watch as a child. And that reminded me when I watched Star Trek, where this technology came from. They must have known about this, right? Then Gene Wilder brings out another film called Rhinoceros, 1974. Another guy called Eugene directs this film, and it's about everybody turning into a rhino. The whole world's like a virus. Everybody turns into a rhino, which kind of depicted a brute force or a mob that was taking over the world. And in that film, there's a guy called Zero Mostel. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he's got very strange, boggly eyes, right? On the front cover of that film, Rhinoceros, 1974, it shows a mutation of a beast to a man, which is genetic modification, right? And also just to bring up dinosaurs, I don't know if you know this, but Jim Henson's dinosaurs, the family name in that was called Sinclair family, which I think you guys just did an episode on them already. Did you do the Sinclairs yet?
Not yet, no.
No, not yet.
So why would you have this family of dinosaurs, Jim Henson's dinosaurs? Why would they call the Sinclairs, right? And dinosaur actually means terrible lizard. So again, we've got all this worship, right? Now, another film, The Little Prince, 1974, Gene Wilder plays the fox. If you've ever seen My Dinner with Andre, I know I'm dropping a lot of bombs here, but that's another film where they directly talking about the importance of this book called The Little Prince. What I think The Little Prince is the story of a real alien boy that came to Earth, and he's been hidden. It could be the story of the man who fell to Earth, this little prince. Anyway, this is the most important part, why I brought Gene Wilder into this, because he was playing the doctor in Young Frankenstein, 1974. And that famous scene where he says, he's alive. That was actually the two Tesla coils in that tasered the monster to come alive, right? So there's your reference to Tesla in Frankenstein. And in that, there's a guy called Marty Fieldman who plays the mutant, Igor the mutant. If you want to talk about boggly eyes, and I believe this is something to do with shapeshifting, I really do, or experiments gone wrong. That guy, Marty Fieldman's got the most insane eyes on film history. So you had this story about this doctor, and they accidentally put the wrong brain in Frankenstein. So he ended up being stupid instead of smart, right? That's kind of like what we could be, this slave race. So in Egypt, there's a temple called the Serapeum of Saqqara. And this is another place that I went where there's these giant big sarcophaguses underground. It's an astonishing piece of work. And it's like why I had these big temples. According to Chris Dunn, I'll briefly talk about this. He thinks that there was some kind of chamber where a body could go into one side of the chamber and a new body was in another chamber, and you could transfer all of the thoughts over into this other chamber using this magnetic stuff. And that's kind of where Elon Musk is going now with Neuralink, right? So this could mean that you know, when you're wore out, you could basically just go and lie down and then your clone would take over, but your thoughts would stay intact. So I found that very, very interesting, right? In the 1989 film, See No Evil, Hear No Evil, if you watch that, it's two guys that look like they could have come back from some kind of reincarnation process, and one of them can't see, one of them can't hear. And it's very like, oh, wow, we're back. They're recollecting their thoughts. They're having that journey. I believe that, right? And then, of course, when Gene Wilder died, Mel Brooks did an interview with David Letterman, and he says in that interview, "Oh, I'm going to miss him. No more wild genes." So his name, Gene Wilder, backwards means wild genes. So maybe for me, that was a comment where they finally mastered DNA. They finally got the slave race that they needed, and they now they can integrate and actually have sex like the fallen angels, let's say, and have these mutant children, but we would never know the difference. But maybe some of these kids have special powers. So I don't know if you remember in Spaceballs, and that was another Mel Brooks movie, that was 1987, classic Spaceballs. There's that scene where he transports himself and his ass is the wrong way around. And for me, that's them. That's these people say, hey, look, we've got the technology, but we're just going to pretend that we don't know how to use it. And I think that's where, you know, when think of how old Star Trek is and how they had this idea of teleportation, right? Now, I've just done the 2 runs there, and I promise you I'll get through this. Thank you for listening, right? Thank you so much.
No problem.
Now, this is where we're going to get into the connection of just before I finish that, Mel Brooks did the History of the World 1981, in which he played Moses. And in that film, the director actually says to the camera, "It's good to be the king," right? So we're talking about the return of a king here, which could be done by reincarnation over time. One of the reasons why they kept mummies in tombs underground was because later, apparently, they could take the DNA from the mummy and bring it back to life using this technology that they used to have, the ancient technology of Egypt. So anyway, now with the king in mind, I just want to bring up Tolkien and how Tolkien comes into this. Tolkien was, he was born in Bloemfontein. Bloom, the reference to Bloom, where did we get that reference before? As I mentioned to you before, Leo Bloom from the producers, the first ever name coming from James Joyce Ulysses, could be a reference to Bloemfontein. And if you know anything about James Joyce, his books are super esoteric. They're very, very cryptid and very difficult to break down. But anyway, there's also a film called The Fountain. So Bloom Fountain. The Fountain was done by Ayn Rand. And in The Fountain, you've got a guy who's an intransigent young architect who battles against conventional standards and refuses to compromise with an architectural establishment unwilling to accept innovation. If you watch that film, what you see there is how they created facades on the front of buildings to show who's in control of that building. So as you see around the world with the old, you've got all these Masonic pillars, you know, which is what my logo sort of represents. My logo represents, like, I can see it and I'm a ninja bursting through that. You know, it's not a secret for me anymore. So what you have now, the J.R.R. Tolkien connection is The Hobbit came out in 1937. And then he did another book called Silmarillion. I don't know if you've read, did you read the books by Tolkien?
No.
Okay. He did a book in 1977, and it was all about the radiance of pure light, which is where we get the elves from, right? The Hellfins. Now, one of your guests brought up the Box Saga on one of your episodes.
That's where we get the elves or the elves.
I'll get to that in a sec. Yeah, somebody mentioned the Box Saga on your podcast, and I would love to do an episode about that later. But the elves, they actually came from Finland, right? So there's a really good guy online. He's got Old World Florida, Narco Longo. He goes into this in great detail. What he says is that the actual fertile land was not in the East. The actual fertile land was in Mexico. And the real Garden of Eden was Florida, because this is where this spring water comes up, right? And in the Ice Age, that spring water would have warmed up Scandinavian area, which would have melted Finland first. So the first civilization would have come out of the Ice Age. So those people were called the Hellfins because they were from Helsinki. And according to the Box Saga, Hell used to be Paradise. That was the center of the earth before the earth's tilt. So you got the Hellfins became the elves, or the elves became the Hellfins, which became the Phoenicians. And you've also got dolphins as well, which some people say are the ancestors of Atlantis, right? Now, from this, the Hellfin, which is where Tolkien got his scripture from for Lord of the Rings, he took it from the Finnish, the Ruin, the ancient Ruin language. And from Ruin is where you get the angle of light. Angle of light, like geometry, where you could cast a shadow onto a ruin and it would cast a shadow on the floor and have a reverse effect. This is where you get the angle of light, which became the angels of light. And that also became Anglo. The English language came from these symbols, right? Which has a Phoenician direct tie, and Phoenicians have got ties to the Nephilim, these giants. Now, there's this interesting thing about the guy, Narco Longo. He's got these huge stones all scattered around in Florida, and they reckon they were the anchor stones from the giant boats of the Phoenicians, and that Miami used to be the port, like the opening doorway where all these sailors would go. So these giant stones that have got holes buried through them, it would have taken giant people to throw them off a boat and drop them in the ground. And when the Great Flood happened, all these stones were washed up in Miami. And now they're on display in golf courses. They're outside people's houses and people don't know what they are, but they look like giant anchor stones, right? Which is hopefully that's some evidence that these Nephilim or giants or Phoenicians, that they existed. So, okay, we've got a connection there with Tolkien, which I'll get into in a sec. Just one more thing about the Elfin, why it's so important is because Elon Musk's son, part of his name is also Elfin. And what caught my attention was when Elon Musk, he was asked, what's your favorite plane? And he said, no, my favorite ship is the SR-71. And that's also in his child's name, SR-71. You know about planes. I think that the SR-71 is not a plane. I think it's a spaceship that's able to go in and out of space. And these people are using it. And they've always been using it, right? So his ex-girlfriend, Grimes, not a fan of any of that. But if you look at her videos, she's always wearing the elfy ears. So they're very much worshipping these elves, right? I think possibly they were the Phoenicians before. So, okay. So that was the first. The first of the Lord of the Rings was called the Fellowship of the Ring. We'll get to that in a little while, why that's appropriate. But then the second part was called the Two Towers, the Tesla Towers. And the third part's called Return of the King. So who is this king, right? Now, Nikola Tesla dies. But if you put Nikola Tesla into an anagram, I found you get Alas, A-L-A-S, Tolkien, right? Which I found was amazing. This could be, is Tolkien Tesla? And there's a time when Tesla was alive that he could have wrote these books and they were published later. And Tesla's telling the story of what he was experiencing in Lord of the Rings, and we're supposed to decode it later. And he's talking about the history of the elves, and that maybe they were taken out, they were murdered, they were killed, replaced by a dark force or whatever. So I hope you're aware of another film called The Current War, 2017, which was all about Westinghouse and Edison. And there's a quote in that which says, whoever has power of the rings has power of the world. So what are these rings exactly, right? And what are the rings of power? I think this goes back to Stonehenge. The Stonehenge was an original, some kind of like cyclotron. And what is a cyclotron? It's like a particle type of silic particle accelerator. It's descended from a cyclotron in which the accelerated particle beams around really fast and explodes. I don't think that's what it really is. I think these are some kind of porthole device or energy device. And as you see, there are loads of these circular formations all around the world. There's one of them in Brookhaven in Long Island, which is right near what is now the Tesla Science Center, which was previously the site of the Wardenclyffe Tower, right? And why did he put it in Long Island? Because you've got the water that's coming into the the bay, and that water passes through Battery Park. That water passed the two towers, right? And it went through the Hudson River all the way to Niagara Falls. And Tesla helped design the generator for that. So what you have there, you have a ultimate free source of power that is going around the world like a snake by being pushing this water around. And they knew that. That's why Niagara Falls was such an important site. And again, Superman 2, that big scene with Superman at Niagara Falls. And Superman does say this is one of the most important sites in the world. So what you've got there is you've got Tesla creating a tower in a specific area. And they said, they accused him of trying to speak to spies and he was apparently using the Eiffel Tower as a sort of transmitter from his tower. Now, that whole site of Whitecliff, they described it as like, it was almost like everybody had disappeared, like everybody had been zapped into another dimension. When they went in there, it was like, you was expecting people to come to work the next day. And this was like 5 years later. It was completely untouched, but completely abandoned. So sounds a little bit like the Philadelphia experiment or whatever. That whole tower was taken down and JP Morgan refused to give the funding to Tesla and it fucked everything up. But what I think's happened there is he's finally figured out what the pyramids were. And when people say, why don't we build pyramids anymore? We do build them. They're just called towers. That's what the Twin Towers were in New York, powering the city, right? And what was the first city in the world that it went from gas to utility? That was Paris. All the people who were into architecture used to say that Eiffel Tower is an ugly thing. Like, why is that there? Because it's a power tower. It's in front of a body of water with an obelisk on the other side, right? And this is like how you take electricity from the ionosphere, you use the water as a conductor, and you create a circuit. And from that circuit, from that tower, just like the Peerless motor car poster, you can beam that out and you can run any device that you want, right? So Tesla basically invented Bluetooth or wireless electricity using this theory. Now, just a couple of other buildings that you have, just to give you reference. There's a donut building in England, which is like, it's called the GCHQ. It's a government communication headquarters for cryptography, and it's an intelligence agency. That's a round building, and that's situated really close to the River Severn. All these structures have to be near water, moving water. And then you've got Apple Park, right? That's near the Bay Area. And also, this is kind of interesting, but if you Google where that plane crashed in Pennsylvania in 9/11, Google the exact site where it landed. There's now a circular memorial site, which to me, I think that these people are rebuilding this smart grid. The original smart grid was Stonehenge and all them old ancient sites. Something happened in the pyramid. It blew up. It affected the ley line system. And now over time, they've been rebuilding this structure. So there's a separate power grid that we don't know about, which goes back to the John Galt thing in the Ayn Rand Atlas Shrugged, this idea that there's a power or elite that are using all this free energy, and we're the slaves just watching our planet get killed, right? There doesn't seem to be humanity connected with what this evil empire is doing to the world. So every major city now, we've gone from smartphone, smart TV, smart tower, smart city, right? And in Vietnam, we now have this new tower called the Landmark. Just to give you some reference, the Great Pyramid was 139 meters. The Wardenclyffe Tower was 187. The pyramid was 481 meters. And then the new tower in Vietnam is 1,500 meters, right? And 10 years ago, I said to my friends here, they will build the giant tower in Vietnam, and that's when Vietnam will become a smart city, and that's when we'll see electric cars come out. Not only has all that happened in the last year, we now have VinFast, and I'm very aware of anything with a V in it, right? I'll get to that in a sec. There's a company called VinFast now. Uber was here. Uber got taken out by Grab, and now suddenly there's all these blue cars everywhere with the V logo. And they said that they had a huge order of cars to go to America, and actually the order fell through. So now instead of wasting all the cars, they've now just decided to create an electric taxi car company, right? Now, my friend took a picture of the bottom of Landmark. He listened to this crazy idea that I had years and years ago. At the bottom of the Landmark, my friends, there are 2 pyramid monuments just there, just like an artistic thing. To me, that's whoever built this, who knows about this technology, they're just symboling like thanks to our ancestors. And then there has
hang on. We've got to stop you again.
Yeah,
so it's been over an hour, and I know Jason and I are having trouble tracking with you. And if that's the case,
I'm nearly there.
Then listeners might be lost. Okay, I was gonna say, is there like an overarching idea to plug this into?
I 100%. This is what I'm saying, right? So if you watch the new Fallout TV show, you've got I'm just going to quickly for you. The new Fallout TV show is all about this idea of cold fusion tech, which can power the world. I think we already have that now. This idea of unlimited free power. I think that the original Egyptian philosophy was something of goodness, and I think it got turned into darkness. And I think what my job is to try to do is bring that light back out again. So now they brought out a new TV show called The Man Who Fell to Earth, which is worth a watch. It's really good. And I was like, oh my God, they've remade this film. And it's all synchronization. Every time I get into something comes out. So in this film, he's a shapeshifter now, right? It's not, sorry, in the TV show, The Man Who Fell to Earth, he's a shapeshifter. He's having problems like surviving on this planet, getting used to the climate. But there's a direct reference in the TV show that he's a Nephilim. And it was the first time I'd seen this connection. I had to explain to you the Tesla connection before. This could be that he's a Nephilim. He's a fallen angel. I'm not sure if they are the serpent men, the men from Mars or whatever. Your guy on your podcast mentioned that, Superman's logo is not an S, it's a serpent. This is the story of the serpent man. The story of Superman was he came from another planet, just like the man who fell to Earth. Now, in this TV show, The Man Who Fell to Earth, the famous actor Bill Nighy is one of these famous actors that's he's famous for having Dupuytren's contracture. Have you ever heard that before? Dupuytren's contracture. Basically, it's like these contractures of the fingers. It's most commonly the ring finger or the little finger, usually bent fingers, right? And it's also known as Viking disease, which can somehow go back to Scandinavia, to the Phoenicians. And interestingly, famous people who have this disease, the hand disease, include Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Paul Newman, Frank Sinatra, and Bill Murray. And even the Queen, the King of England, Charles, he's got what we call sausage fingers. So to me, the hands are very, very important, because whenever you look at Masonic pictures, you'll always see like some kind of strange hand in the painting, right? We should come into it in a sec. So if you Google Bill Nighy, you'll find a photo of him where he's holding his glasses like this, and you'll see how his fingers are specifically creating what's like a claw symbol, right? Now, the claw symbol, this is where we get the Vulcan hand sign, which is kind of like an amphibious webbed hand, right? It's not the 5 fingers like us, it's the 3. If you Google a picture, you remember you watched Star Trek. The inventor of the transporter in Star Trek was a guy called Emery Erickson. It was in Enterprise, season 4, episode 10, and it was called Daedalus. And in Daedalus in Greek mythology meant skillful architect and craftsman, seen as a symbol of wisdom, knowledge, and power. He is the father of Icarus. And we know the story of Icarus. He flew too close to the sun. That's when you get the same story of Garden of Eden. Get too close to knowledge, something bad will happen. So what was interesting about Emery Erickson, if you Google it and look at that episode, he's got really weird fingers, almost like tentacles. And this isn't special effects. This is shit that I see a lot now with these famous people, especially their hand movement, right? So what's the Star Trek logo? If you look at it, it could be depicted as a snake tongue. The first ever scene in Star Trek, the first scene in the pilot cage, you zoom into the dome on the top of the Enterprise. To me, that's saying, look, you're all inside this Enterprise and we're the captain at the top of the ship, ejecting everything down, right? I thought that was the most interesting scene in the whole Star Trek, is the first ever scene in it. And then the first episode of Star Trek was called Man Trap, and it's all about a shape-shifting reptile, the evil cabal, which you don't really see much of in the rest of Star Trek. But for some reason, they wanted to put shape-shifting reptiles in the first ever episode, right? What's the NASA logo? You've got a snake tongue. The Marines logo, the Marines amphibious mascot, they have this, they have a Freddy the Frog mascot, which is a relation to the frog. The Marine, I think it's the Navy SEALs have some kind of amphibious mascot, right? And then if you look at the actual US Marine, the Navy symbol, which has got like the eagle or whatever, and it looks like it has an anchor. That's not an anchor, that's a reptile. Look at it closely, you'll see a reptile, right? So you've got the whole Navy now worshiping these reptilians somehow. And then I'm nearly there. The Space Force TV show that came out, there was a scene where they were joking, and before the rockets take off, there was a guy outside clearing all the little lizards off the runway. And again, why would you do that? Why would you care about these little lizards? It's just them worshiping these lizards. So then we've got the famous TV show called V. And V is also a snake tongue, right? You remember V? Did you watch that on TV?
I have.
I don't think so.
Oh, it's very, very much worth a look back. So in V, you've got these visitors from another planet, which are reptiles underneath the skin. And if you remember, they had a logo in that, which looks like the swastika. And actually, the swastika comes from the Finnish philosophy. Swastika means fire stick. It's the swa fire, stick of fire, which actually is supposed to represent the wheel of life. And the Nazis inverted that to become an evil thing instead, right? So what do we have now? We have this, if you Google the TV show V poster where it says friendship is universal, you'll see a claw. The guy looks like he's putting his hand out to shake your hand, but he's showing a claw, which is similar to this Masonic stuff that I see in all the old pictures of the Freemasons. They all have these really funny looking, these hands, right? And it's what you call the claw hand, the three fingers. Now, if you do go back and watch that, the V, you'll see insectoid movement by the actors. I think these are real aliens, real aliens right there. You'll see the aliens sucking the water from the Hoover Dam, which is why we have deserts, is my guess now. They're harvesting our water and they're harvesting us for food, right? And there's that famous movie, Soylent Green. Charlton Heston, at the end of that film, 1973, it was based in 2022. Right at the end of Soylent Green, Charlton Heston's being carried off on a stretcher and he puts his hand up in the air. If you zoom in on that, you'll see the claw. I swear to God, you'll see the claw hand, right? I just want to shout out another film, Cloud Atlas, the scene in Cloud Atlas where she's being shown the conveyor belt and it's like we are being harvested for food for somebody else and we don't know about it. I think that's really going on. So what do we got now? We're nearly there. Thank you guys for listening. But the V in the Freemason logo apparently represents the opening of female legs. And then the other one from the top, it's supposed to represent some kind of sex symbol or, you know, the celebration of male and female. As I said before, maybe Akhenaten didn't have a partner to breed with. And over time, these guys have designed the ultimate breeding partners, which is what we are, to keep their bloodlines going. I'm not sure about that, but you just did an episode on the, you mentioned about the fleur-de-lis, I think, the Merovingian. So the original fleur-de-lis was actually called the Clovis shield, and it initially had 3 frogs on there, 3 blue frogs, and they all had 4 fingers. And later that was changed to the fleur-de-lis, right? Again, it's a 3. And if you look at the symbol of the Klingons in Star Trek, that is an upside down, like a T, 3 parts, right? And I noticed that and I was like, wow, the Klingon symbol, they had a mutant child. I don't know if you know this, but the actual name Elizabeth apparently means lizard birth, right? So that's your relation to this snake or whatever serpent. And then the Monster logo, for example, in UFC, when you watch UFC, you've got Monster drink, energy drink. That's like 3 scratch marks, the claw mark in the middle. Apparently, this comes from the trident in Poseidon. Poseidon was an amphibious god, right? And then we come to the Tesla logo, which looks like the Klingon logo upside down. And look, go and Google the Tesla logo. What I mentioned before about the teeth of Tesla being described as the ADSI tool, the Tesla logo looks like two of these ADSI tools that's put together to create a red fang, right? And I believe that this is possibly what we call the Third Reich. I believe that the Reichs are some kind of landing of maybe an alien species or some next force. You know, we're talking about the Fourth Reich, which is where you get symbolism that has 4 pieces. So I see a lot of M's around, like McDonald's, for example. If you turn an M around, you get a 3. I'm not sure if it links in, but yeah, an M's more like a 3 to me, and this is everywhere. And Merovingians maybe. But here we go, just to get to the end of this. Now we're getting to Elon Musk, and Elon Musk is from Pretoria. They just made a movie called Escape from Pretoria, which sounds a little bit like Escape from Predator to me, right? In the Predator aliens, as I mentioned, the pyramids are their feeding grounds, and modern cities with a big tower could be the new feeding ground for this species or whatever. And they feed off our energy as well, especially things like football stadiums. If you watch the World Cup, when you pan out of a football stadium, the stadium is the new all-seeing eye. It's there, right? Very symbolic. So they're not messing around. This is real shit. Now, when I look at Elon Musk, I got to say, he reminds me a bit of Batman. He's like the modern version of Batman. He's got all this money. He's got all these gadgets. Is Batman related to a vampire? I'm not sure. But I had this just came out of nowhere. I don't know where it came from, but the name Elon Musk, never heard a name like it ever. It sounds to me like elongated tusk, which to me is a fang or something sharp. Elongated tusk, Elon Musk. I don't know. And if you look at pictures of Elon Musk laughing and you Google pictures of David Bowie, they look very similar, right? And what's Elon Musk's goal? His goal is to get back to Mars. That's what he wants to do. So just to nearly finish this, in Terminator 1984, there was a robot sent back from 2029, right? And now we're talking about the 2030 agenda. And Chris Dunn's just released a new book, which I haven't read yet, but please go and read these books. And it's called Giza, the Tesla Connection. So I'd already made this connection way before these other people had started making it. So it's all interlinked, right? Now, to end this, what animal hates reptiles the most?
What do you got?
Which
I got
animals?
nothing.
Which animals always like fighting with reptiles? Which of the animals? More.
What we got?
Well, domesticated animals. Which one would you say are always going at it with the reptiles? Snakes.
No dogs.
Yeah, cats. Thank you. Right. So I have 2 cats, and they're called Operation and Red Pill, also known as Jason and Chris. And together we are the Wonder, 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 Wonder Cats. Thanks for listening. That's my little presentation. I'm sorry I kept you up for so long. I hope
with the thunder. That's funny.
Thanks a lot, guys. Like, I'm not going to keep you any longer, but yeah, I hope that presentation makes a bit of sense, Larry. It's definitely one to listen back, but that's just a little, I wanted to do you a little credit. That's the first time I've ever put down notes. I'm exhausted. We've been up like 3.5 hours. Hopefully that's the start of me getting better and getting better, but I totally appreciate your feedback. It's definitely long-winded. I need to fine tune it in, but I just hope it all comes together for the listeners at the end. I really do. Guys, thank you so much for letting me get on here. I hope we can speak again sometime. And I'm always here for you. And just amazing work, guys. Amazing.
Hey, we appreciate you having us, man. Definitely thank you for all of your kind words and for providing us an opportunity to be able to have this interview and talk. The presentation you gave was very fascinating. The one thing I would say to that,
yeah,
one of the things that we find that is very challenging for us is not falling into an esoteric pit where there are a lot of symbols, but we have to have a framework by which we evaluate that. For us, it's strictly the Bible. And the reason for that is that's the only time proven book that we have seen that actually shows things as they are. Without that, you get into a lot of these esoteric ideas, the symbolisms, the things that seem like they're connected, and they could be a little bit of speculation here and there.
yeah.
And I caution a person that does that to find that single point of framework, because if you start pulling from different people like a David Icke or some of these other people, while the information is very interesting, like Ike in particular, some things I really like listening because it piques the interest and gets the gear spinning. But I've also had to go back to, does this line up scripturally? If not, I find myself in a position where, well, okay, well, what he said was kind of interesting, but this guy over here said something that doesn't quite fit, that's also kind of interesting. And a lot of the stuff you can't lump together
Yeah.
because it may sound nice, but it doesn't pan out. And I
Yeah.
think it's really critical, find that central place that you can begin to evaluate that stuff from, so that you can definitely turn and look at this stuff from a centralized, not just centralized, but from a integrated, cohesive position. That was
Mm.
one of the things we were talking about earlier, like with Ravi Zacharias, the fact that there is a consistent framework that is interconnected and does not violate itself is one of the hallmarks of, am I looking at truth or am I under speculation? And I
Yeah.
think that would be a really good place to start. Having said that, though, I wish we could continue the conversation further. We're about 30 minutes past our window, but
Uh,
definitely say, Adam, thanks for having us on here. It was a blast. We totally enjoyed meeting you. Thanks for being a listener and a supporter of the show. And absolutely, man, we'd love to do something again with you.
Brilliant. Great stuff. Chris, you want to finish it off, buddy?
That was pretty good, but just in talking about like format, and he was saying, to have a solid place to spring from. Something that he's constantly refining in me is, and I keep hearing it in my head over and over, but like when you're structuring an episode, to tell him what you're going to tell him, and then tell him that you told him,
Yeah.
is a way to reinforce and keep the listeners on track.
Yeah. That's a good experience for me. That's the first time, and no better judges than you. So
yeah, I mean, a lot of really interesting things that you covered. So yeah, that's a lot to try to pack in and make cohesive. But I definitely think you've got potential for sure.
thank you. That's all. That's all, man. Thanks very much for giving me the chance, guys. I'm gonna wrap it up. Amazing time with you. Good luck, and I'll keep listening in, and I hope more people will check them out. Operation Red Pill, Jason, Christopher, absolute legends. Good night. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Night. Take
Good night.
care.
Thanks, man.
Yo.